Hello, my dear adventurers. It's Fox. Welcome back to another evening of shared stories and adventures. Tonight, we're diving deep into the upside-down world of Stranger Things. Now, I'll be honest, I thought I knew this show pretty well after watching it through multiple times, but the more I looked into the expanded lore, the interviews with the Duffer Brothers, and all the little details I'd missed, I realised there's so much more beneath the surface. I think if you're more of a casual fan or just really enjoyed the show without dissecting every frame, there's a lot of fascinating stuff to learn. And I'll be covering all the topics I can fit in for tonight, but there's definitely more to come in future videos. So we'll start with the origins of Hawkins' lab and how real government conspiracies inspired the show. Then we'll move on to the Upside Down itself, the creatures that inhabit it, and the intelligence controlling everything. We'll explore Vecna's backstory, psychic powers, important locations around Hawkins, and plenty of secrets hidden throughout the series. Plenty to get talking about, but if you like what I do here and want a way to support the channel, consider checking out my Patreon, linked in the description down below. But for now, grab your walkie-talkie and Eggo waffles, get cozy in the blanket fort, and let's begin. So way before the events of Season 1, and even before Hawkins became a hotspot for interdimensional horror, there was a secret government project that started it all. And honestly, the real history makes the show's fiction seem almost tame by comparison. The Duffer Brothers didn't just make up the idea of the government experimenting on people to develop psychic weapons. They based it on actual declassified CIA programs from the Cold War era, specifically something called MK-Ultra. Now, MK-Ultra was a real covert program that ran from the early 1950s through the 1970s, and it involved some absolutely mental experiments on unwitting American citizens. The CIA was trying to develop mind control techniques, truth serums, and ways to enhance human cognitive abilities, all in the name of staying ahead of the Soviets. They used everything from LSD to sensory deprivation to psychological torture. And when I say unwitting citizens, I mean people who had no idea they were being experimented on. Patients in hospitals, prisoners, even CIA employees were dosed with drugs without their knowledge or consent. It's properly disturbing when you dig into the actual historical records. In Stranger Things, this real program becomes the foundation for Hawkins' National Laboratory. The show imagines what might have happened if one of these research facilities had actually succeeded in creating psychic abilities, and then pushed even further. Dr. Martin Brenner, who everyone calls Papa, is the scientist leading the Hawkins program. He's obsessed with developing psychic powers in children, believing that young minds are more malleable and capable of accessing abilities that adults can't. According to the show's timeline, Brenner had been running experiments since at least the late 1960s. One of his earliest test subjects was Terry Ives, a young college student who volunteered for what she thought were harmless sensory deprivation studies in 1969. She was actually pregnant at the time, though she didn't know it yet, and the experiments she underwent affected both her and her unborn daughter. That daughter, of course, would become 11. What's really interesting is how the show handles the ethics of all this. Brenner genuinely believes he's doing important work for national security. In his mind, the Soviets are developing their own psychic weapons, and America needs to keep pace or risk losing the Cold War. He's not cackling like a cartoon villain, which honestly makes him more disturbing. He sees these children as necessary sacrifices for the greater good. The Numbered Children program, where kids are literally given numbers instead of names, shows how dehumanized the whole operation became. We know there were at least 18 test subjects because we meet Carly, who's number 8 in Season 2, and we learn about Henry Creel, who was number 1 in Season 4. But there were probably more. Some might have died during the experiments, others might have escaped or been deemed failures and released. The show never gives us the full count, which leaves this unsettling question hanging over everything. Now, the lab itself was built in Hawkins, Indiana, which seems like a random location until you think about it strategically. Small Midwestern town nothing particularly notable about it, far from major cities where journalists and activists might be paying attention. The perfect place to hide a secret research facility. The lab operated under the cover of being a Department of Energy plant, which is brilliant if you think about it. Department of Energy facilities are supposed to be secure and off-limits, so no one questions the fences and armed guards. The town accepted the story that important energy research was happening there, research related to national security that couldn't be discussed publicly. Most of Hawkins had no idea what was really going on inside. Even the mayor and local officials were kept in the dark, though they were probably paid off or pressured to not ask questions. It's that classic government conspiracy setup where compartmentalization keeps the truth contained. Only people with the highest security clearances knew about the psychic experiments, and even fewer knew about what would come later with the Upside Down. The lab had multiple levels of security, with the really sensitive stuff happening in the basement levels where the public would never see. There were living quarters for the test subjects, though calling them living quarters feels generous. They were more like cells. There were training rooms where Brenner would put the children through various exercises to develop and measure their abilities. And there was the sensory deprivation tank, which became one of the most important tools for enhancing psychic powers. The tank works by removing all external stimuli, floating you in body temperature salt water in complete darkness and silence. When your brain isn't processing sight, sound, touch, or even the sense of gravity, apparently it becomes easier to access psychic abilities like remote viewing and telepathy. I think it's meant to be this thing where your consciousness isn't anchored to your physical senses anymore, so it can reach out beyond your body. Eleven uses the tank throughout the series to find people across long distances, basically projecting her awareness to wherever they are. Fun fact that a lot of people don't realise, the sensory deprivation tank isn't made up for the show. They're real devices that have been used for decades, initially for psychological research and later for meditation and relaxation therapy. You can actually go to flotation therapy centres today and experience it yourself, though hopefully without the government mind control experiments attached. The Duffer Brothers took this real technology and imagined what it might be capable of in the hands of someone like Brenner with psychic test subjects. But Brenner and his team weren't content with just studying psychic abilities. They wanted to push further, to see what else the human mind could access. By the early 1980s, the Numbered Children program was well established. Henry Creel, who we'll talk about in detail later, had been there since the 1950s when he was just a child. He was a natural psychic, born with abilities rather than given them through experiments, which made him especially valuable to Brenner. Other children were brought in over the years, taken from their families under various pretexts or, in Terry Ives's case, essentially stolen at birth. The parents who knew their children had been taken were either silenced through legal threats and financial payoffs, or they were discredited and made to look crazy if they tried to go public. Terry Ives ended up in a permanent catatonic state after Brenner's people found out she was trying to get her daughter back. Whether they did that to her, or whether it was damage from the original experiments, is never entirely clear, but either way, it kept her from talking. And here's where it gets even more sinister. The lab didn't just experiment on people. According to what we learn across the seasons, they were also studying dimensional physics, trying to understand if other realities or dimensions could exist alongside ours. This was connected to the psychic research because they theorized that psychic abilities might involve accessing information or energy from other dimensions. It's like they were combining Cold War paranoia with cutting-edge quantum physics theories and a complete disregard for ethical boundaries. Imagine being a scientist in 1970s. America, knowing that the Soviets are probably running similar programs, given unlimited funding, and told that national security depends on you succeeding. The pressure to get results, to keep pushing the boundaries, must have been immense, and that pressure led directly to what happened on November 6, 1983. That date, November 6th, is when everything changed. That's when 11, during a training exercise with Brenner, made contact with a creature from another dimension. Brenner had been pushing her to use her remote viewing abilities to spy on a Soviet agent. She found the agent, but she also sensed something else, something that didn't belong in our world, a creature that would later be nicknamed the Demogorgon by Mike Wheeler, after the monster from Dungeons and Dragons. 11 touched this creature psychically, and in doing so, she created a rift between dimensions. She tore open a gateway, which we see happen in the Season 4 flashbacks, showing what actually went down that day. The gate appeared in the basement of Hawkins' lab, in the containment area where 11 was being held. It was this grotesque, organic-looking tear in reality, pulsing and alive, and through it came the Demogorgon. The lab went into immediate lockdown. Brenner saw this both as a disaster and an opportunity. He'd proven that other dimensions existed, that they could be accessed, and that they contained life forms. But he'd also lost control of the situation. The Demogorgon was loose in the facility, and 11 had escaped during the chaos. Over the next year, the lab's priority became containing the gate, studying what came through it, and hunting for 11. They couldn't let the public know what had happened, so they covered up the deaths that occurred during the initial breach. When Will Byers went missing after encountering the Demogorgon that had escaped into Hawkins, the lab tried to control that narrative too. They faked a body and tried to convince everyone the boy had drowned. It nearly worked, except Joyce Byers refused to accept it, and her determination, combined with Hopper's investigation and the kids finding 11, exposed the truth. The really fascinating thing about Hawkins' lab is how it represents this collision between science and the supernatural. Brenner approaches everything from a scientific perspective. He wants to measure, quantify, and understand the upside down and its creatures. He sees them as phenomena to be studied and potentially weaponized. But what he doesn't seem to fully grasp, at least not until it's too late, is that some things can't be controlled through scientific method alone. The upside down isn't just another dimension with weird physics. It's something darker, something that seems to have a malevolent intelligence behind it. And by opening that gate, the lab didn't just make a scientific discovery. They invited something hostile into our world. After the events of Season 1, the lab tried to maintain operations, but they were under increased scrutiny. The Department of Energy officially shut down the Hawkins facility, though as we learn later, Brenner himself survived and continued his work elsewhere. The building stood abandoned, or at least that's what the public was told. In reality, different government agencies continued to monitor the site, studying the gate that remained open in the basement. It took until the end of Season 2 for that original gate to finally be closed, when 11 used her powers to seal it shut. But closing one gate doesn't erase what happened. The damage was done. Hawkins had become a thin place where the barrier between dimensions was permanently weakened. The lab's legacy haunts the entire series. Even when the building itself isn't being used, its influence persists. The conspiracy, the cover-ups, the willingness to sacrifice innocent people for perceived national security, all of it created the conditions for everything that follows. Dr. Owens, who takes over for Brenner in later seasons, represents a slightly more ethical approach to the situation. He at least seems to feel some guilt about what's been done, and he tries to help the kids while also managing the government's response. But even he's constrained by the system, by the need for secrecy, by the impossibility of fully explaining to the public what's really going on in Hawkins. How do you tell people that a secret lab opened a portal to a monster dimension? How do you explain that without causing mass panic? The lab's original sin of secrecy breeds more secrecy, more lies, more cover-ups. It's a proper mess, honestly. But Brenner and his team weren't working entirely in the dark about what they might find. Before 11 opened the gate, there were theories and legends about other dimensions. Henry Creel had told Brenner about his experiences with what we now know was the Upside Down, though Henry's connection to it was unique, and we'll get into that later. There were also historical incidents that might have been related, though those are more speculation than confirmed canon. The point is, the lab knew they were playing with fire. They just thought they could control it. Peak human arrogance, really. Thinking you can contain and weaponize an entire parallel dimension filled with hostile life forms. And the worst part is, they weren't even the only ones trying. As we find out in Season 3, the Soviets had learned about the gate and were running their own operations to access the Upside Down. But we'll talk about that later when we get to the Russian conspiracy angle. The Hawkins lab origin story is properly chilling when you think about how much of it is grounded in real history. The government really did run programs like MKUltra. They really did experiment on unwitting citizens. And while they didn't open portals to monster dimensions, as far as we know, they did commit serious ethical violations in the name of national security. Stranger Things takes that real darkness and asks, what if they'd actually succeeded in one of their goals? What if psychic powers were real? And then, what if those powers led to something even more dangerous? It's a brilliant premise because it starts from a place of historical truth and then extrapolates into supernatural horror. The show never lets you forget that government conspiracies are real, even if interdimensional monsters might not be. That grounding in reality makes everything that follows feel more plausible and therefore more frightening. In their quest to weaponize psychic powers, they accidentally discovered something else entirely, something that existed in a dimension right alongside ours, a mirror world that had been there all along, waiting to be found. Let's talk about the Upside Down itself. So here's one of the most unsettling aspects of Stranger Things lore, the Upside Down. This parallel dimension that exists right beneath our reality, a dark mirror of Hawkins frozen in time. And honestly, the more you learn about it, the creepier it gets. The Upside Down is essentially a parallel dimension that somehow mirrors our world, specifically Hawkins, Indiana, in its geography and structures, but it's this dark, decaying, hostile version. When you enter the Upside Down, you'll find the same buildings, the same streets, the same layout as Hawkins in the normal world, but everything is covered in this organic, vine-like growth. The atmosphere is dark and filled with floating particles that look like ash or spores. The air is toxic to humans if you breathe it too long, and everything is cold, properly freezing actually, like you're in this perpetual winter even though it's meant to be Indiana. The whole place feels like Hawkins died and started decomposing, and then came back as something wrong. What's really wild about the Upside Down is the frozen in time aspect. When characters travel there throughout the series, they notice that the dimension is stuck on November 6th, 1983. That's the day 11 opened the first gate and made contact with the Demogorgon. Anything that existed in Hawkins on that date exists in the Upside Down. Anything built or changed after that date doesn't appear there. So when Nancy goes to the Upside Down, in Season 4, she finds her house, but it's her house as it was in 1983, with her old bedroom and her old belongings. Nothing from the years since appears there. This creates some really interesting implications. Does the Upside Down only mirror November 6, 1983, because that's when it was first accessed? Or is there something special about that date? The show doesn't give us a completely clear answer, which honestly makes it more mysterious and unsettling. Now there's a big question that the show played with for a while. Did 11 create the Upside Down when she opened the gate, or did it already exist and she just found it? For the first 3 seasons, you could interpret it either way, but Season 4 gives us the answer, and it's a bit complicated. The Upside Down existed before 11 opened the gate. It was already there as a parallel dimension, but it wasn't always the dark mirror of Hawkins. According to what we learn from Vecna's backstory, the dimension was originally just this sort of empty, formless place. It was Henry Creel, after 11 banished him there in 1979, who shaped it into what we see. He spent years there, possibly decades from his perspective, and he moulded the dimension to his will, making it into a twisted reflection of Hawkins. The frozen time aspect, the specific mirroring of locations, that all comes from his influence. So 11 didn't create the dimension, but she created the connection to it, and Henry created its current form. The physical properties of the upside down are really interesting from a world-building perspective. Everything is covered in these vine-like tendrils and this sort of organic membrane. It looks biological, like the entire dimension is one big living organism. And actually, that might not be far from the truth. The vines seem to be part of a larger network, all connected, all part of the hive mind that the mind flayer controls. When someone disturbs the vines or injures them, it seems like the entire dimension can feel it. There's this scene in season 2 where Hopper burns a section of the vine tunnels underneath Hawkins, and it weakens the mind flayer's hold on Will, because the whole hive mind experienced that damage. So the dimension isn't just a place, it's more like an organism itself, or at least it's been colonized by one massive interconnected life form. The atmosphere in the upside down is toxic, which is why characters who go there need to protect themselves or limit their exposure. The particles floating through the air aren't just ash, they seem to be spores or some kind of organic material from the vines and growth everywhere. Prolonged exposure makes people sick, and it can establish a connection between a person and the hive mind. That's partly how Will became the spy for the mind flayer in season 2. He'd spent a week trapped in the upside down at the end of season 1, and even after being rescued, those particles were still inside him, creating a link that the mind flayer could exploit. It's like the dimension itself is infectious. Just being there changes you, creates an opening for the intelligence controlling it to get inside your head. I think one of the scariest aspects is how the upside down seems designed to lure people in and trap them. When Will was stuck there in season 1, he could still see through to the normal world sometimes. Like he could see his mum, but she couldn't see him. He could communicate through lights and electricity, which seems to be easier to manipulate from the upside down side. Electrical currents are affected by the dimensional barrier, so you can cause lights to flicker or send messages through Christmas lights if you're clever enough. Joyce figured this out and created a whole alphabet on her wall so Will could spell out words by making different lights glow. It's such a brilliant bit of problem solving under impossible circumstances, and it shows that the barrier between dimensions isn't completely solid. There's bleed through, especially around gates or thin points where the veil is weakened. Fun fact that most people miss, the upside down isn't just under Hawkins. It's a parallel dimension, which means it probably mirrors the entire world. There's an upside down version of every place on Earth, theoretically, but we only ever see the Hawkins region because that's where the gates are, and that's where the story takes place. I wonder sometimes what the upside down version of major cities looks like. Is there an upside down New York? An upside down London? Are there creatures living in those areas? Or is Hawkins special because of the gates that have been opened there? The show hints that Hawkins is significant for reasons beyond just random chance. Some fan theories suggest it's located on some kind of mystical ley line or energy convergence point, but that's never confirmed in canon. What we do know is that Henry Creel's family moved to Hawkins because his father was offered a job there, and Henry seemed to sense something about the town even before he fully understood his powers. So maybe there is something special about the location itself. The organic nature of the dimension really can't be overstated. Everything looks grown rather than built. The vines pulse like veins. The membrane covering walls looks like skin or tissue, and it's all decaying, rotting, but somehow still alive. It's body horror on an environmental scale, honestly. Walking through the upside down must feel like being inside a corpse that's still animated, still hungry. The show's visual design for this is brilliant. They use a lot of practical effects, real vines and materials, which gives it this tangible, disgusting texture. And the colour grading is all desaturated blues and greens, making everything look cold and dead. Even the light sources, when there are any, are sickly and wrong. It's such effective visual storytelling because you can immediately tell something is fundamentally broken about this place just by looking at it. One thing I've always wondered about is whether the upside-down dimension has any other areas beyond the Hawkins region. Like if you kept walking in one direction from upside-down Hawkins, would you eventually reach upside-down Indianapolis? Or is there literally nothing beyond the boundaries of what's been connected through the gates? The show never explores this because the characters never have time to just wander and map the dimension. They're always on specific missions with immediate danger. But it's an interesting question about the nature of parallel dimensions. Is it infinite like our world, or is it limited to what's been connected or observed from our side? These are the kind of questions that make the world building feel deep and thought out, even if we don't get explicit answers. The temperature in the upside down is consistently freezing, which creates problems for anyone who gets stuck there. Will had to build a shelter and find ways to stay warm during his week there. The cold isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous, life-threatening if you're exposed too long. This might be connected to the dimension's association with death and decay. Cold preserves bodies, slows decomposition. Maybe the upside down is cold because it's fundamentally a place of stasis, frozen on November 6th, 1983, preserved but wrong. Or maybe it's just that the dimension's atmosphere and physics work differently from ours, and the result is this perpetual winter. Either way, it's another layer of hostility. Even if the creatures don't get you, the environment itself is trying to kill you. The way structures from Hawkins appear in the upside down is really fascinating too. They're not just copies, they're decayed versions, like they've been there for decades or centuries, even though it's only been a few years at most. The Wheeler house in the upside down is covered in vines and falling apart, but it still has all the furniture and personal items from 1983. It's like everything was transported there and then immediately started aging rapidly in this hostile environment. Or maybe time works differently there, where our years are its decades. The show doesn't give us precise rules for this, which honestly makes it more unsettling. You can't predict what you'll find or how things will behave. The familiar becomes uncanny, and that's deeply disturbing on a psychological level. There's also the question of whether anything besides the monsters naturally lives in the upside down. Are there plants or animals that evolved there, separate from the interdimensional invaders? We never see anything like that. Every living thing we encounter is either from our world or one of the hostile creatures. The upside down seems almost sterile of complex life beyond what the mind flayer Vecna controls. It's all vines and spores and predators. No ecosystem in the traditional sense, just this consuming, spreading network. That raises the disturbing possibility that the upside down wasn't always like this. Maybe it was a normal parallel dimension once, with its own life and environment, and then it was taken over, colonized by the hive mind entity. Maybe what we're seeing is a dimension that's been completely conquered and converted into a weapon. That's a properly dark thought, honestly, but the upside down isn't just an empty parallel world, it's inhabited, and what lives there is the stuff of nightmares. Since we're on the topic of the upside down, it's time to discuss my personal favourite part of the mythology, the creatures that call it home, and the intelligence controlling them all. And now, my personal favourite part of Stranger Things lore, the mind flayer and the creatures it commands. This is where the show goes from sci-fi conspiracy to cosmic horror, and I absolutely love it. The mind flayer is the entity that seems to control everything in the upside down, or at least that's what we think for most of the series, until season 4 complicates things. But let's talk about what the mind flayer is and how it operates, before we get into who's really pulling the strings. The mind flayer first appears in season 2, though it's been influencing events since the beginning. When Will Byers is trapped in the Upside Down during Season 1, he's exposed to this entity. After he's rescued and brought back to the normal world, he starts having visions of this massive shadow creature in the upside down sky. It looks like a giant spider made of darkness, with legs stretching across the horizon. Dustin names it the Mind Flayer, after the Dungeons and Dragons monster, because it has similar abilities. In D&D, a Mind Flayer is a psychic creature that can control and consume the minds of others. And that's exactly what this thing does. The Mind Flayer operates through a hive mind system, where everything it touches or infects becomes part of its collective consciousness. When Will is possessed by the Mind Flayer in Season 2, he describes it as this presence that's everywhere at once, ancient and massive, and it wants to spread and take over everything. It uses Will as a spy, seeing through his eyes, learning about Hawkins and the people trying to stop it. Will calls them now memories, because the Mind Flayer experiences what Will experiences in real time. It's properly invasive and horrifying, having something else inside your head, watching through your eyes, controlling your thoughts. The only way they manage to expel it from Will is by heating him up in a sauna until the entity can't tolerate the temperature and is forced out. Heat is one of the Mind Flayer's weaknesses. It thrives in the cold of the Upside Down, but extreme heat disrupts its connection. What's really interesting about the Mind Flayer is how intelligent it is. This isn't just some mindless monster. It's strategic, patient, and absolutely ruthless in pursuit of its goals. In Season 3, after the gate is closed at the end of Season 2, a piece of the Mind Flayer gets trapped in Hawkins. Instead of dying or disappearing, it goes dormant, hiding and waiting for an opportunity. When the Russians start trying to reopen the gate with their machine under Starcourt Mall, the Mind Flayer senses the possibility and starts preparing. It begins possessing people, turning them into what the characters call the Flayed. These are humans who've been taken over by the Mind Flayer, their minds consumed, their bodies operated like puppets. The most tragic example is Billy Hargrove, who gets possessed and becomes the Mind Flayer's primary agent in Season 3. The Flayed are disturbing because they look mostly normal at first. They go about their daily routines, but they're different. They're colder, both in personality and literal body temperature. They're working toward the Mind Flayer's goal without anyone realizing it, and that goal in Season 3 is absolutely mental. The Mind Flayer uses the Flayed to create what the kids call the flesh monster. It makes the possessed people drink chemicals and fertilizers to essentially melt their bodies, turning them into this organic slurry, and then it combines all of them into one massive creature made of melted human tissue, bones, and blood. It's peak body horror, honestly. The flesh monster is huge, vaguely spider-shaped like the Mind Flayer's shadow form, and it's nearly unstoppable. It takes the combined efforts of the entire cast, including 11 fighting it with her powers, to finally defeat it. But let's talk about the regular creatures, the ones that seem to be the Mind Flayer's foot soldiers. The Demogorgon is the first one we meet, the creature that takes Will Byers in the first episode. Demogorgons are these predatory monsters that hunt by smell, particularly the smell of blood. They don't have eyes or a traditional face. Instead, they have this flower-like head that opens up to reveal multiple rows of teeth and a lamprey-style mouth. It's such a disturbing design, properly nightmare fuel. They're incredibly strong, capable of smashing through walls and overpowering adult humans easily. And they can travel between the normal world and the Upside Down, either through gates or by creating temporary portals in weakened areas of reality. Demogorgons also have a life cycle, which we see in Season 2 with Dart. The boys find what they think is just a weird pollywog, but it turns out to be a baby Demogorgon. It starts as this slug-like creature, maybe the size of your hand. Then it goes through a stage where it grows legs and becomes what they call a demo dog, about the size of a large dog, but with the same flower petal head design. Finally, it matures into a full Demogorgon, which is human-sized or larger. Dart is special because Dustin raised him, and even after Dart becomes a demo dog, there's this moment where he remembers Dustin and lets the group pass. It's one of those brief hints that these creatures might have more individuality than we think. They're not just mindless drones, or at least they're not always mindless. When they're connected to the hive mind, they follow orders. But Dart, separated from the Upside Down and the Mind Flayer's direct influence, developed a bond with Dustin. It's quite touching, actually, in a weird way. In Season 4, we get introduced to another creature, the Demo Bats. These are flying versions of the Demogorgon design, basically. They're bat-sized creatures, sometimes larger, with the same toothy mouths and no visible eyes. They hunt in swarms, and they're fast and aggressive. Eddie Munson's death in the Season 4 finale is caused by a massive swarm of Demo Bats attacking him. He sacrifices himself to buy the others time, and the bats just overwhelm him. It's properly sad, and it shows how dangerous these things are, even when they're smaller than full Demogorgons. A single demo bat might not kill you, but a swarm of them absolutely will. All of these creatures, the Demogorgons, Demodogs, Demobats, they're all connected to the hive mind. They share consciousness with the Mind Flayer and with each other. When one creature learns something, they all learn it. When one spots prey, the others know about it instantly. This makes them incredibly effective hunters and nearly impossible to hide from once they've found you. The only advantage the humans have is that the creatures are bound by the Mind Flayer's strategy. They don't just randomly attack, they follow a plan, which means if you can figure out what the Mind Flayer wants, you might be able to predict what the creatures will do. The hive mind also means that damaging one part hurts the whole system. When Hopper burns the vine tunnels underneath Hawkins in Season 2, the pain or damage is felt throughout the entire network, including by Will, who's possessed at the time. It's like the vines, the creatures, and any possessed humans are all part of one big organism. Attack any part and the whole thing reacts. This becomes a key strategy later on. If you can find a central point or a particularly vulnerable part of the hive mind, you can do disproportionate damage to the whole system. Fun fact about the Demogorgon design. The Duffer Brothers wanted something that felt both alien and organic, like it could actually be a creature that evolved in a harsh environment. The flower petal head was inspired by real creatures like certain deep-sea fish and the lamprey's circular mouth. They wanted it to be recognizable enough that you could understand what you were looking at, but alien enough that it felt wrong. Not of this world. I think they absolutely nailed it. The Demogorgon is iconic at this point, instantly recognizable and genuinely scary even when you've seen it multiple times. But here's where things get really interesting. For 3 seasons, we assume the Mind Flayer is the ultimate big bad, the evil intelligence running everything. But Season 4 reveals that's not quite true. The Mind Flayer has a master, someone who's controlling it, who shaped it into a weapon, who's been orchestrating events from the beginning. And that revelation completely recontextualizes everything we thought we knew about the Upside Down and the creatures. The Mind Flayer isn't the villain. It's a tool. The real villain has been there all along, and his name is Henry Creel, or Number 1, or as he's better known by Season 4's end, Vecna. What makes the Mind Flayer truly terrifying isn't just its power, or its hive mind, or its army of monsters. It's the fact that it's being wielded by someone with a specific plan, someone who understands humans because he used to be one. The Mind Flayer's actions across the series, they're not random. They're directed by someone with a grudge against humanity and a vision of reshaping the world. Now, talking about the Mind Flayer leads us naturally to the reveal that changed everything. The truth about who's really controlling the Upside Down. Let's talk about Henry Creel, Number 1, or as he's better known by the end of Season 4, Vecna. Now, the biggest reveal in Season 4 was that pretty much everything we thought we knew about the Upside Down was wrong, because it all traces back to one person, Henry Creel, And honestly, his backstory is properly tragic, which makes him an even more effective villain. He's not evil because he's a monster. He became a monster because of what he experienced and what was done to him. That doesn't excuse his actions, obviously, but it makes him more complex than just a generic big bad. Henry Creel was born with psychic abilities. He didn't get them from lab experiments or exposure to anything supernatural. He was just naturally gifted, which apparently happens sometimes in the Stranger Things world. As a child in the 1950s, Henry lived with his family in Hawkins. His father, Victor Creel, had taken a job in the town, and they moved into this big old house. From the start, Henry felt something off about the place, about Hawkins itself. He was sensitive to things that normal people couldn't perceive, and that sensitivity only grew stronger as he got older. He started developing abilities like telekinesis and telepathy, but he kept them secret from his family. He knew they wouldn't understand. They'd probably be frightened of him. Henry's abilities came with this dark side, though. He could sense other people's thoughts and emotions, and what he found there disturbed him. He saw humanity's capacity for cruelty, selfishness, and hypocrisy, and it made him hate people. His father, Victor, was this World War II veteran who'd done things in the war, probably killed people, and then came home and pretended to be a normal family man. Henry could sense that guilt and that disconnect, and it disgusted him. He started to believe that humans were fundamentally broken, that society was a lie built on suffering and repression. These are the thoughts of a child with way too much power and way too much access to the worst parts of human nature, and it warped him. In 1959, when Henry was still quite young, maybe around 11 or 12, something terrible happened in the Creel house. The family started experiencing what seemed like hauntings, lights flickering, objects moving on their own, visions of disturbing things. Victor thought the house was cursed or possessed, but it wasn't the house. It was Henry. He was using his powers, either consciously or subconsciously, to torment his family. Things escalated until one night, Henry killed his mother and sister. He used his psychic abilities to break their bones and crush their bodies, making it look like something supernatural had done it. Victor survived only because Henry wanted him to suffer, wanted him to live with the guilt and confusion of what had happened. Victor was convicted of the murders and sent to a psychiatric hospital, where he spent the rest of his life claiming that a demon had killed his family. Everyone thought he was insane, but he was actually telling the truth, or at least his version of it. He'd seen something demonic, something evil, murder his wife and daughter. He just didn't realize it was his own son. Henry, meanwhile, was found comatose at the scene. When he woke up in the hospital, Dr. Martin Brenner was there. Brenner had somehow learned about Henry, probably through government surveillance of unusual incidents, and he recognized that the boy was psychic. Brenner saw an opportunity. He took custody of Henry, probably under some legal pretense related to the murders, and brought him to Hawkins' lab. Henry became the first test subject, number 1. For years, maybe decades, he lived at the lab. Brenner studied him, tried to understand his powers, tried to replicate them in other children. Henry played along, pretending to be compliant, because he was biding his time. He was also learning, studying Brenner's methods, understanding how the other numbered children were being trained. By 1979, there were at least 18 children at the lab, all with various psychic abilities, all numbered and controlled by Brenner. Henry had been there the longest. He was stronger than any of them, but Brenner had him fitted with this device implanted in his neck that suppressed his powers. It kept him docile, controllable. One of the children at the lab was a young girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old, named 11. Henry took an interest in her, saw potential in her. He started befriending her, talking to her, showing her kindness that Brenner never did. He positioned himself as an orderly, someone with no powers, just a friendly adult who understood what the children were going through. But Henry had a plan. He convinced 11 to use her powers to remove the device from his neck, the one that was suppressing his abilities. She did it, not understanding what would happen next, and once Henry was free, he unleashed absolute carnage. The massacre at Hawkins' lab on September 8th, 1979, is one of the most brutal moments in the show's backstory. Henry used his powers to systematically kill everyone in the Rainbow Room where the children were held. He crushed their bones, tore them apart psychically, and left them broken and dead. He killed the guards, the scientists, everyone he could reach. His goal was to burn down the lab, to free himself, and to take 11 with him. He saw her as the only one worth saving, the only one who might understand his vision of tearing down the corrupt world and rebuilding something new. But 11 refused. Even though she was just a child, even though Brenner had been cruel to her, she understood that what Henry was doing was wrong. They fought, and in that fight, 11's powers proved stronger. She didn't just defeat Henry, she banished him. She opened a rift to another dimension, to the empty space that would become the Upside Down, and she threw him through it. The force of it was so great that it created the first crack in reality, the beginning of the gate that would later fully open in 1983, and Henry, falling through dimensional barriers, was burned and torn apart, transformed from a human into something else. He landed in the Upside Down, his body broken and twisted, more dead than alive, and he stayed there. Over the years that Henry spent in the Upside Down, and we don't know exactly how long it was from his perspective because time might work differently there, he shaped the dimension. Remember, it was originally empty and formless. Henry used his psychic powers to mold it, to create the dark mirror of Hawkins, to connect with the life forms there, and bend them to his will. He found the Mind Flayer, or created it. The show isn't entirely clear on which, but by the time we see his true form in Season 4, he's become something called Vecna, named after the most powerful lich in Dungeons & Dragons lore. He's this corpse-like figure, his body covered in the vines from the Upside Down, one hand twisted into a claw with too many fingers, his whole form a fusion of human and something other. Vecna's abilities in Season 4 are terrifying. He doesn't just kill people, he curses them. He targets individuals who are suffering from trauma, guilt, or depression, and he torments them with visions of their worst memories and fears. His victims see him in their minds, this nightmare figure that only they can perceive, and he hunts them through their own psychological pain. After tormenting them for a period of time, making them more and more terrified and isolated, he kills them. And his method of killing is brutal. He lifts them into the air telekinetically, breaks all their bones, and crushes their eyes into their skulls. It's his signature, his way of imposing his will on reality. Each kill weakens the barrier between dimensions, creating a new gate. His plan is to kill 4 people in specific locations around Hawkins, creating 4 gates that will converge and tear open a massive rift, allowing the Upside Down to pour into the normal world. The victims he chooses in Season 4 are Chrissy Cunningham, a cheerleader dealing with an eating disorder and abusive mother, Fred Benson, a student guilty over a car accident he caused, Patrick McKinney, a basketball player being abused by his father, and finally Max Mayfield, who's suffering from depression and guilt over her stepbrother Billy's death. Vecna nearly succeeds in killing Max, but she's saved at the last second by her favourite song. Music, it turns out, is a defence against Vecna's curse. It grounds you in happy memories, pulls you out of the vision state he traps you in. Max escapes his first attempt, but later, in the season finale, he gets her. She technically dies for a minute before 11 uses her powers to restart Max's heart and pull her back. But Max is left in a coma, her fate uncertain. What's really chilling about Vecna is his ideology. He genuinely believes he's doing something noble. In his mind, humanity is a plague, a cancer on the world, and he's the cure. By destroying everything, by letting the Upside Down consume reality, he thinks he's creating an opportunity for something better to emerge. It's nihilistic and twisted, but it comes from a place of pain. Henry as a child was exposed to the worst of humanity through his psychic abilities, and it broke him. He couldn't handle seeing people's thoughts, their selfishness and cruelty, and he concluded that everyone was rotten to the core. It's the reasoning of someone who never learned how to process what he was experiencing, who never had anyone help him understand that yes, humans are flawed, but they're also capable of love and sacrifice and growth. I think what makes Vecna work as a villain is that he's not wrong about some things. The world does have darkness in it. People do hurt each other. Society does have deep problems. But his solution, to burn it all down and let monsters rule, that's where he loses any moral high ground. He's become the very thing he claimed to hate. Someone who uses power to hurt and control others. Someone who inflicts suffering without mercy. He's everything he accused humanity of being, magnified and made monstrous. The transformation from Henry to Vecna is also symbolic. He wanted to escape his human form, to transcend the weaknesses and corruption he saw in humanity. And he did, in a way. But in the process, he became something that's not human, but also not natural, not whole. He's this in-between thing, stuck in the upside down, his body merged with the dimension itself. He can't leave without opening a big enough gate. He's trapped there, even as he's the one in control. It's a proper prison, of his own making, honestly. Henry destroyed himself in trying to destroy everything else, and now he's this broken, undead thing that can only interact with the normal world through curses and possession. The reveal that Vecna has been behind everything, that the Mind Flayer is essentially his weapon, recontextualizes the entire series. Every attack, every possession, every gate opening, it's all been him working toward his goal of tearing down the barrier between worlds. The Demogorgon that took Will in Season 1, probably sent by Vecna. The Mind Flayer possessing Will in Season 2, Vecna's doing. The Flesh Monster in Season 3, Vecna's attempt to create a physical form in the normal world. It's all been one long campaign to break through and finish what he started in 1979, when 11 banished him. But Vecna doesn't work alone. He controls an entire ecosystem through what's basically a biological network that connects everything in the Upside Down. Let's talk about the hive mind and how possession actually works in Stranger Things. So one of the most terrifying aspects of the Upside Down isn't just the monsters. It's how everything there is connected through this sort of biological hive mind system. And honestly, the mechanics of it are fascinating and horrifying in equal measure. The hive mind concept is central to understanding how Vecna and the Mind Flayer control their forces. Everything in the Upside Down, the vines, the creatures, the very atmosphere itself is connected through what appears to be a biological network. Think of it like a nervous system spread across the entire dimension. When one part is affected, the whole system knows about it. When a Demogorgon sees something, that information is available to Vecna, to the Mind Flayer, to the other creatures, all simultaneously. It's perfect coordination without needing communication because they're all part of the same organism, essentially. Will's possession in Season 2 is our first real look at how this works on a human. After being rescued from the Upside Down at the end of Season 1, Will seems fine at first. He's traumatized, obviously, dealing with what he went through, but physically he appears okay, except he starts having these episodes where he can see into the Upside Down. He calls them now memories, because they feel like memories but they're happening in real time. He's experiencing both worlds simultaneously, seeing the shadow of the Mind Flayer in the Upside Down sky, while also being physically present in Hawkins. It's like his consciousness is partially stuck in the other dimension, unable to fully disconnect from it. The doctors and scientists studying Will think these are just flashbacks, PTSD from his ordeal. But Joyce and Hopper start to suspect it's more than that. Will's episodes become more frequent and more intense. He's drawn to certain locations, feels compelled to go places without understanding why. And then Bob Newby, Joyce's boyfriend, who's honestly one of the show's most underrated characters, suggests that Will should confront his fear. Stand up to the mind flayer in his visions and tell it to go away. It's well-meaning advice, the kind of thing you tell someone dealing with nightmares. But this isn't a normal psychological situation. Will tries to stand up to the mind flayer, and instead of empowering him, it gives the entity an opening. The mind flayer possesses him fully, taking over his body and using him as a spy in the real world. When Will is possessed, he's still himself most of the time. But there are moments when the mind flayer is in control, looking through his eyes, listening through his ears, gathering information. The group realizes this when they notice Will having these blank moments, these lapses where he's not fully present. They test him by showing him things and seeing if he remembers, and they discover that entire chunks of time are missing from his memory. Those are the moments when the mind flayer is fully in control, and Will's consciousness is suppressed. What's really disturbing is how the possession works. The mind flayer doesn't just control Will's body like a puppet, it's inside his mind, experiencing his thoughts and memories, learning about everyone Will cares about. It knows Mike and Dustin and Lucas because Will knows them. It understands Hopper and Joyce's plans because Will hears them, and it's using that information to stay one step ahead. Every time the group comes up with a strategy, the mind flayer knows about it through Will. It's the ultimate surveillance, having a spy who doesn't even know he's betraying his friends most of the time. The group realizes they need to expel the mind flayer from Will. But how do you do that? They can't just ask it to leave. They need something that will make it want to leave. That's when they remember that the mind flayer is from the upside down, a cold dimension, and it should be vulnerable to heat. They take Will to Hopper's cabin and crank up the heat as high as they can get it. They seal the windows, light fires, turn on space heaters, anything to raise the temperature. And then they basically roast Will, heating him up until the mind flayer can't tolerate it anymore. It's brutal to watch because Will is suffering. He's screaming and thrashing, and you can see the entity fighting to stay inside him. But eventually, the heat forces it out. This black, smoke-like substance pours out of Will's mouth and throat, the physical manifestation of the mind flayer's presence leaving his body. It's a proper exorcism scene, honestly, and it's one of the most intense moments in Season 2. But even after the mind flayer is expelled, Will retains a connection to it. He can still sense when it's close, can feel when the hive mind is active. This connection becomes useful later because it means Will can act as an early warning system. When the mind flayer or its creatures are near, Will feels it, gets this sense of cold dread and awareness. It's like he's permanently sensitive to the upside down after his exposure to it. The particles he breathed in during his time there, the week he spent in that hostile dimension, it changed something fundamental about his biology or his consciousness. He's marked by it. Billy Hargrove's possession in Season 3 shows us a different type of connection to the hive mind. Billy gets possessed after the piece of the mind flayer that was trapped in Hawkins attaches itself to him. Unlike Will, who fought against the possession, Billy seems to give in to it more quickly. Maybe because Billy already had so much anger and pain inside him from his abusive father and his messed up home life. The mind flayer takes that darkness and amplifies it, uses it. Billy becomes the primary agent for creating the flayed, other possessed humans who will help build the flesh monster. The flayed are disturbing because they appear normal most of the time. They go to work, interact with people, act like nothing's wrong, but they're colder, both emotionally and physically. If you touch them, their skin is unnaturally cold. And they're working together on this plan they don't consciously understand. They're drawn to consume chemicals and fertilizers which will break down their bodies. They're all moving toward a central location where they'll merge into the flesh monster. It's like the hive mind has a blueprint, and each flayed person is a component being assembled into this larger weapon. Billy's possession is tragic because you can see glimpses of his real self still trapped inside. There are moments when he fights against it, when he remembers who he is. His connection to Max, his stepsister, is what ultimately breaks through. In the season 3 finale, when the flesh monster is about to kill 11, Max appeals to Billy, reminds him of a happy memory from his childhood, before his life became so dark, and for just a moment, Billy breaks free of the Mind Flayer's control. He turns on the flesh monster, fights it to protect 11 and Max, and sacrifices himself in the process. It's one of the most emotionally powerful scenes in the series because Billy was not a good person. He was cruel and violent and damaged. But in that final moment, he chose to be something better. He broke the hive mind's hold through sheer force of will, motivated by love, or at least the memory of what love felt like. This shows that possession isn't absolutely unbreakable. Strong emotions, especially love and connection to others, can disrupt it. That's why music works to save people from Vecna's curse in Season 4. Music is tied to memories, to emotional experiences, and those emotions can anchor you to reality, pull you out of the mental trap Vecna creates. Max's favourite song, Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill, becomes her lifeline. When she's trapped in Vecna's vision, being tormented by her guilt over Billy's death, her friends play the song through her headphones. She hears it, remembers the feelings associated with it, and it creates a pathway back to reality. She's able to run from Vecna in her mind, literally sprinting through the vision until she breaks through and wakes up back in the real world. The mechanics of Vecna's curse are a bit different from the Mind Flayer's possession, but they're related. Vecna targets people who are suffering emotionally, people dealing with trauma, grief or guilt. He creates a psychic connection to them, probably through the same hive mind network that connects everything in the Upside Down. Once he has that connection, he can pull them into a vision state where he torments them. It's like a nightmare they can't wake up from, and while they're trapped there, their physical body goes catatonic, eyes rolled back, unresponsive. To outside observers, it looks like they're having a seizure or some kind of medical emergency, but inside their mind, they're fully conscious and experiencing absolute terror. The progression of the curse takes time. Vecna doesn't kill immediately. He wants his victims to suffer, to feel helpless and afraid, so he starts small, with headaches and nosebleeds, bad dreams, and a sense of being watched. Then the visions start. The victim sees Vecna, this rotting corpse figure, stalking them. They see horrific images from their own memories, their worst moments replayed and distorted. And finally, when Vecna decides they've suffered enough, he pulls them into the final vision, lifts them into the air, and breaks them. Each death creates a gate, a crack in reality that connects the Upside Down to Hawkins. 4 deaths in the right pattern will create a massive convergence of gates, tearing open a rift big enough for Vecna to physically cross over. What I find interesting is that the hive mind isn't just about control, it's also about connection and shared experience. When Vecna shows Max visions of Billy's death, he's accessing her memories, her guilt, her pain. The hive mind allows him to understand humans on this deep, intimate level, to know exactly what will hurt them most. It's weaponized empathy in a twisted way. He connects to people, understands them completely, and then uses that understanding to destroy them. It's what makes him such an effective villain. He doesn't just physically overpower you, he gets inside your head and turns your own mind against you. The broader implication of the hive mind is that privacy and individual thought don't exist in the Upside Down. Everything is shared. Every creature, every vine, every possessed person is part of this collective, which raises disturbing questions about identity and consciousness. If your thoughts are shared with everyone else, are you still an individual? When the Mind Flayer possesses someone, is the original person still in there somewhere? Or are they erased? The show suggests they're still there, buried under the possession, because characters can be saved and restored. But what happens if they're possessed too long? Do they eventually get fully absorbed into the hive mind? their individuality dissolved? We don't really get answers to these questions, which makes it all more unsettling. Possession is just one application of the powers we see in Stranger Things. The show is really built on the foundation of psychic abilities, and there's a lot more variety to them than most people realize. Since we've been talking so much about how the Mind Flayer and Vecna control others, let's discuss the various psychic powers that exist in this world, from telepathy to precognition to remote viewing and beyond. Now, you can't talk about Stranger Things without diving deep into the psychic abilities that drive so much of the plot. And honestly, there's way more variety to these powers than most casual viewers probably notice. The show is smart about how it presents this stuff, introducing different abilities gradually across the seasons, so you build up this complete picture of what's possible in this world. Telekinesis is the most visible and dramatic power, and it's what 11 is famous for. Telekinesis is the ability to move objects with your mind, to exert force at a distance. 11 can do everything from flipping cars to crushing people's brains. Her telekinesis is incredibly powerful, but it takes a physical toll. She gets nosebleeds when she pushes herself, and if she goes too far, she can exhaust herself to the point of passing out, or even temporarily losing her powers. In Season 3, after she fights the flesh monster and closes the gate to the Upside Down, her powers just stop working. It's like she burned out the part of her brain that generates those abilities. She doesn't get them back until Season 4, after the Nina Project helps her recover them through memory work. But telekinesis isn't one-dimensional. 11 uses it in lots of creative ways. She can create shields or barriers made of force. She can sense people and objects at a distance, like a psychic radar. She can pull or crush or shatter things depending on what's needed. Other numbers had telekinesis too, like Henry Creel, who could do everything 11 could and more. His telekinesis was refined enough that he could target specific bones in a person's body, breaking them with precision. It's like the difference between using a sledgehammer and using a scalpel. Both can cause damage, but one is much more controlled. Telepathy is another key ability. Though it's less flashy than telekinesis, telepathy is reading minds, sensing thoughts and emotions, communicating mentally with others. Henry Creel had strong telepathic abilities even as a child. He could hear people's thoughts, which is partly what drove him to hate humanity so much. Imagine being a kid and constantly hearing the dark, selfish, cruel thoughts that everyone has but doesn't say out loud. It'd be overwhelming and disturbing. Telepathy seems to require focus and proximity in most cases. You can't just read anyone's mind from anywhere. You need to be close to them or have a strong connection to them. Remote viewing is what 11 uses with the sensory deprivation tank. It's the ability to project your consciousness to a distant location and observe what's happening there. When 11 goes into the tank and enters the mental space she calls the void, she can find people anywhere in the world. She sees them in this black empty space where only the target person appears, and she can watch what they're doing, hear what they're saying. It's essentially psychic spying, which is what Brenner wanted to use her for. He had her remote viewing Soviet agents, learning their secrets without ever physically going near them. The void itself is really interesting as a concept. It's not a physical place, it's more like a mental construct, a visualization technique that helps 11 focus her remote viewing abilities. Different psychics might experience it differently. For 11, it's this endless black space, like floating in darkness. She walks around in the void, and when she finds her target, they appear surrounded by a little bit of their physical environment. If they're in a room, she sees them and maybe a bit of the room around them, but the rest is darkness. It's properly surreal, and it shows how psychic abilities in Stranger Things are partly about perception, about how you mentally frame and access these powers. Precognition, the ability to see the future or sense what's coming, shows up occasionally. 11 sometimes gets feelings about things before they happen. In Season 2, she senses that Hopper is in danger and goes to help him, even though she has no way of knowing what's happening. It's not reliable prophecy, it's more like intuition, amplified to a supernatural level. Henry Creel also seemed to have precognitive abilities, or at least a strong intuition about how events would unfold, which helped him plan his actions. Then there's empathy and emotional manipulation, which we see with Carly, also known as 8. Carly's power is illusion creation, which is different from telekinesis, but equally powerful in its own way. She can make people see things that aren't there, experience sensations that aren't real. She uses this ability for revenge, tracking down the people who hurt her when she was at Hawkins' lab and making them hallucinate horrifying things before she kills them. When 11 finds Kaylee in Season 2, Carly tries to teach her how to use emotions, specifically anger and pain, to fuel her powers. Carly's philosophy is that the angrier you are, the stronger your abilities become. 11 experiments with this, and it does make her more powerful, but it also makes her more cruel and reckless. Eventually, she rejects Carly's approach, realizing that using her powers out of hate isn't who she wants to be. The variety of abilities among the numbered children suggests that psychic powers aren't all the same. Different people manifest different gifts, or maybe they have the potential for multiple abilities but tend to specialize in what comes naturally to them. Brenner was trying to catalogue and measure all of this to create a scientific understanding of psychic phenomena. He had the children do exercises, tests, training sessions, all designed to push their abilities and see what they were capable of. Some of the children probably died in these experiments, pushed too hard or exposed to something dangerous. The ones who survived and developed useful powers were kept and trained further. The sensory deprivation tank is such a central tool for enhancing psychic abilities that it's worth talking about in detail. The idea behind it is that when you remove all external stimuli, sight, sound, touch, even the sense of your own weight and gravity, your brain's normal processes quiet down. The constant chatter of sensory input stops, and that creates space for other kinds of perception. Psychic abilities, in the show's logic, are accessing information through non-physical means. So if you quiet the physical senses, the psychic senses can emerge more strongly. 11 finds the tank peaceful once she gets used to it. It's a space where she's in control, where she can focus entirely on her task without distraction. She floats in the salt water, which is mixed to match her body's density, so she doesn't sink or float, just suspends in place. The water is heated to body temperature, so after a few minutes you can't feel where your skin ends and the water begins. It's disorienting at first, but then it becomes this profound stillness. And in that stillness, 11 can send her mind out to find whoever she's looking for. She navigates by intuition and connection. If she knows someone, if she has a link to them, she can find them, even if they're thousands of miles away. The tank has its limitations, though. You can observe through remote viewing, but you can't really interact. 11 can see and hear what's happening, but she can't touch things or speak to people. It's like watching through a window. There are rare moments when she breaks through that barrier, like when she communicated with Mike through the radio in Season 1, or when she shattered the picture frame in the house she was remote viewing. But those moments take enormous effort and cause serious strain. Remote viewing is meant to be passive observation, and trying to affect the physical world from the void is pushing the ability beyond its normal limits. Fun fact about sensory deprivation tanks: they were invented in the 1950s by a neuroscientist named John C. Lilly, who was actually involved in some of the real consciousness research that inspired the MKUltra program. Lilly was interested in what happens to the brain when you remove sensory input, and he built the first isolation tank to study that question. He also experimented on himself, which led to some wild experiences involving hallucinations and supposed contact with non-human intelligences. The Duffer Brothers definitely drew on this real history when creating the show's version of the technology. Another aspect of psychic powers in Stranger Things is how they're connected to emotion and mental state. When Eleven is calm and focused, her abilities are controlled and precise. When she's angry or scared, her powers spike in strength, but also in unpredictability. She might break things accidentally, or lash out with more force than she intended. This is why Brenna tried to teach the children emotional control, to make them less reactive, more like weapons that could be deployed reliably. But suppressing emotions isn't healthy, especially for children, and it led to a lot of psychological damage among the test subjects. Carly represents the opposite philosophy. She believes you should embrace your emotions, especially negative ones like anger and pain, because they make you powerful. She's not wrong that emotions can fuel psychic abilities. We see Eleven access greater strength when she's fighting to protect her friends or when she's desperate. But Carly's approach also makes you destructive and self-destructive. It burns hot and bright, but ultimately unstable. Eleven's path is finding a balance, using her emotions without being controlled by them, accessing her full strength without losing herself in rage or hate. The limitation of psychic powers is really interesting too. They cause physical strain, nosebleeds, and headaches being the most common symptoms. Push too hard, and you can pass out or burn out entirely, like Eleven did in Season 3. This creates natural, dramatic tension. Characters with powers can't just solve every problem effortlessly. There's a cost to using their abilities, and they have to choose carefully when to push themselves and when to conserve energy. It also means that in a prolonged conflict, psychics can be worn down, exhausted, made vulnerable. Henry Creel's natural abilities set him apart from the children who were given powers through experiments. He was born with his gifts fully formed, or at least they developed naturally as he grew. This gave him an advantage in terms of raw strength and control. He didn't have to learn his abilities from scratch or be trained by Brenna. He just knew how to use them instinctively. This is why he was number one, the first and strongest test subject. Brenna studied Henry obsessively, trying to understand what made him special, trying to replicate that natural gift in other children. But you can't fully replicate something like that. The other numbers were powerful, but Henry was on another level, and he knew it. The numbered children who survived the lab, at least the ones we know about, are scattered now. 11 is obviously the main character. Carly is alive somewhere, doing her own thing after parting ways with 11. Henry became Vecna, but there were others. Where are they? Are they hiding? Afraid to use their powers? Did they lose their abilities over time? Are there other facilities with other numbered programs that we haven't learned about yet? These are questions the show hasn't fully answered, which leaves room for future exploration. I think the variety and complexity of psychic abilities in Stranger Things is one of the show's strengths. It's not just people can move things with their minds. There are layers to it, different applications, different strengths and weaknesses. It feels like a developed system of magic, almost, with its own internal logic. And that makes the world feel richer and more real, even though we're dealing with supernatural powers. These abilities are what make Stranger Things sci-fi rather than just horror, but they're also what opened the door to the Upside Down in the first place. And that door has been opened multiple times throughout the series, in various ways. Speaking of doors, let's talk about the gates themselves, how they form, where they appear, and why they're so dangerous when left open. Let's talk about one of the most dangerous aspects of the Upside Down connection, the gates. These tiers between dimensions that let the horror bleed through into Hawkins. And honestly, the mechanics of how gates work are really fascinating when you dig into them. Gates are basically ruptures in the fabric of reality, points where the barrier between our dimension and the Upside Down has been torn or worn thin enough that passage becomes possible. They're not natural phenomena, at least not originally. Every gate we see in the series is created through some kind of intervention, usually involving psychic power or massive energy expenditure. The original gate, the big one in the basement of Hawkins' lab, was created on November 6, 1983, when 11 made psychic contact with the Demogorgon while in the sensory deprivation tank. Brenner had pushed her to find and observe a Russian agent, which she did, but she also sensed this other presence, something that didn't belong to our world. When she touched it psychically, the connection was so intense that it tore open a rift. In that moment, two dimensions that had been separate suddenly had a physical connection point. The gate manifested as this grotesque, organic-looking tear in the wall of the lab's basement. It looked biological, like a wound in reality rather than a clean doorway. The edges were raw and pulsing, covered in those same vines and membranes that cover everything in the upside down. It was actively growing too, slowly expanding, as if the upside down itself was trying to push through and widen the opening. The lab's immediate response was containment. They sealed off the area, set up monitoring equipment, tried to control what came through, but you can't really contain something like that. The Demogorgon escaped, and it could travel between dimensions using the gate. It could hunt in Hawkins, then retreat to the upside down, where humans couldn't follow. The gate stayed open for over a year, from November 1983 until November 1984. During that time, it was spreading. The upside down was infiltrating Hawkins through underground tunnels that grew from the gate like roots from a tree. These tunnels spread out underneath the town, creating a network of passages filled with vines and spores. Hopper discovered them when he was investigating the pumpkin blight affecting local farms. He realized that the rot was coming from underground, and when he dug down, he found these tunnels. Walking through them was like walking through the intestines of some massive creature. Everything was organic and pulsing and alive, and it was all connected back to the main gate at the lab. Closing the gate required immense psychic power. In the Season 2 finale, 11 had to enter the lab, get right up to the gate, and use her telekinesis to basically force it shut. She's pulling the edges of the tear together, sealing the wound in reality through pure will. It nearly kills her. The strain is enormous, blood pouring from her nose, her whole body shaking with effort. But she manages it. The gate closes, and with it, the Mind Flayer's connection to Will is severed. The tunnels underneath Hawkins collapse or go dormant. For a while, it seems like the threat is over. But in Season 3, we learn that the Soviets have been trying to reopen the gate. They built an entire secret facility under Starcourt Mall, equipped with this massive machine they call the key. The key is meant to tear open a new gate by brute force, using exotic particles and enormous amounts of energy to rip through the dimensional barrier. The Russians understand the physics of it, at least partially. They know that there's another dimension accessible from Hawkins, and they want their own gate so they can study the upside down and potentially weaponize what they find there. The key almost works. They manage to create small temporary rifts, but they can't stabilize a permanent gate. Something about the specific conditions in Hawkins makes it easier to open gates there than anywhere else. The Russians tried to replicate the process in their own country, built a facility there with the same technology, but they couldn't get it to work. So they came to Hawkins, built their base under the mall, and kept trying. By the Season 3 finale, they're on the verge of succeeding when the main characters sabotage the key and cause it to explode. The explosion destroys the facility and closes whatever rifts the Russians had managed to open. But there's a cost. When the key explodes, it seems to kill Hopper, who was trapped in the blast zone. And unbeknownst to the characters, the Russians did successfully open a gate briefly in their Kamchatka facility before the one in Hawkins was destroyed. They managed to capture some creatures from the upside down, including a Demogorgon, and they're keeping them in a prison complex in Siberia. So even though the threat in Hawkins is neutralized for the moment, the upside down is still accessible elsewhere in the world, which has troubling implications. Smaller temporary gates can also be created by Demogorgons. They seem to have the ability to tear open brief portals when they're hunting. These aren't stable gates that stay open permanently. They're more like doorways that exist for a few seconds, just long enough for the creature to pass through. We see this in Season 1 when the Demogorgon appears in places it shouldn't be able to reach if it were only using the main gate. It's hunting Eleven and the boys, and it can manifest wherever it needs to. The mechanism isn't fully explained, but it seems like Demogorgons can thin the barrier between dimensions in their immediate area, creating a temporary weak point they can slip through. Once they pass through, the portal closes behind them. Season 4 introduces a new method of creating gates, and it's perhaps the most horrifying. Vecna's curse kills create gates. Each time he successfully kills someone, breaking their bones and crushing their eyes, a gate opens at the location where they died. It's not a huge gate like the one in the lab, more like a crack or fissure, but it's stable and it stays open. Vecna's plan is to kill 4 people in specific locations around Hawkins, creating 4 gates that form a pattern. When all 4 exist simultaneously, they'll converge, tearing open a massive rift in the centre of town. This is what happens at the end of Season 4 when Vecna kills Patrick and nearly kills Max. Even though Max is briefly revived, her death still counted for long enough that the 4th gate formed. The 4 gates split open and merge, creating this enormous crack that runs through downtown Hawkins, splitting the town into sections. The gates that Vecna creates are different from the lab gate or the Russian attempts. These gates are tied to death, to trauma, to the moment of a person's destruction. They're supernatural in a way that the other gates aren't, more like curses than scientific phenomena, and they can't be closed the same way. 11 couldn't just push them shut with telekinesis because they're not held open by physical force. They're held open by Vecna's will, by the curse itself. As long as he's alive and maintaining his hold on reality, those gates will stay open. The visual characteristics of gates are really consistent throughout the show. They always look organic, like wounds or tears in living tissue. The edges are irregular, sometimes weeping this viscous fluid. They're surrounded by vines and growth from the upside down, as if the dimension is colonizing the area around the gate. Standing near an open gate, you can feel the cold air coming through from the other side. See the floating particles, hear the strange sounds of the upside down. It's like standing next to a doorway into death itself. And the longer a gate stays open, the more the upside down leaks through. The area around the gate starts to change, becoming more like the other dimension. Reality is being overwritten. What's really terrifying about gates is what they represent. Each one is a failure of the barriers that should keep dimensions separate. Reality is supposed to be stable, solid, predictable, but gates show that it's actually fragile. With enough power or the right conditions, you can punch through. And once you do, you've created a permanent weakness. Even if you close the gate, the scar remains. Hawkins has been torn and patched so many times that it's like a piece of cloth that's been stitched and restitched. Eventually, it's going to fall apart completely. The broader implication is that Earth itself might be in danger. If gates can be opened in Hawkins, they can probably be opened anywhere, given the right tools or abilities. The Russian program shows that other governments know about this. How long before someone else tries? How long before gates start opening in New York or Moscow or Beijing? The upside down is a threat to the entire world, not just one small town in Indiana, but the world doesn't know it yet because everything's been kept secret. That secrecy might be the most dangerous thing of all. People can't prepare for or defend against a threat they don't know exists. I think the gates work really well as a plot device because they create escalating stakes. Each season, the gates get bigger or more numerous or harder to close. Season 1 was about stopping one Demogorgon that got through one gate. Season 2 was about closing the main gate before the Upside Down completely infiltrated Hawkins. Season 3 was about preventing a new gate from being opened. And Season 4 is about dealing with multiple gates opening simultaneously and merging into a catastrophic rift. The threat keeps growing, and the solutions keep getting more desperate and costly. The gates represent the biggest threat to Hawkins and potentially the world. But there was another group who understood this danger and tried to exploit it for their own purposes. The Russians learned about the gate, learned about Hawkins' connection to the Upside Down, and they launched their own operation to access this power. Since we're on the topic of gates, we can't ignore the massive operation happening literally underneath Starcourt Mall, the Russian base and their attempts to access the Upside Down. So it turns out Hawkins' lab wasn't the only government agency interested in the Upside Down. The Soviets were running their own program, and they built an entire secret base under a shopping mall to do it, which when you think about it is absolutely mental. The logistics alone of secretly constructing a massive underground facility in the middle of small-town America without anyone noticing must have been incredibly complex. But apparently, the Russians pulled it off, which shows just how serious they were about accessing the Upside Down. The Soviet interest in the Upside Down makes sense from a Cold War perspective. If the Americans had discovered another dimension full of potential weapons and resources, the Soviets would have been desperate to access it themselves, or at least to deny the Americans exclusive access to it. They likely learned about Hawkins' lab and the gate through their intelligence networks. Maybe they had a spy in the lab or the Department of Energy. Maybe they intercepted communications. However they found out, they decided to act on it rather than just observe from a distance. Their initial attempts were apparently made in the Soviet Union. According to what we learn in Season 4, the Russians built their own facility, probably somewhere in Siberia, and tried to open a gate there using technology similar to what the Americans had used. But it didn't work. They couldn't tear through the dimensional barrier, or if they did, they couldn't stabilize it. Something about Hawkins specifically made it easier to create gates there. Maybe the original gate in 1983 permanently weakened the barrier in that location. Maybe there is something unique about the geology or energy of that particular spot. Whatever the reason, the Russians realized they needed to be in Hawkins itself to succeed. That's when they came up with the Starcourt plan. The mall was being built as this big development project, meant to revitalize downtown Hawkins and bring in jobs and revenue. The Russian program, probably through front companies and corrupt officials, got involved in the construction. They built the mall as designed, but underneath it, they excavated an enormous secret base. They brought in equipment, scientists, workers, all under the guise of legitimate construction activities. The base itself was massive, with multiple levels, research facilities, power generation, living quarters for the staff, and at the center of it all, the key device. The key was this enormous machine designed to generate enough energy to forcibly tear open a gate. It worked by firing a beam at a specific point, heating and exciting the dimensional barrier until it ruptured. The technology was advanced but also crude in a way. Instead of the finesse of psychic abilities like what 11 used, this was brute force. They were essentially trying to punch a hole in reality through sheer power. The first several attempts failed. The beam would fire, the energy would build up, but no gate would form. Or a tiny rift would open for a split second before collapsing. But the Russians kept trying, kept refining the process. By the summer of 1985, when Season 3 takes place, they were getting close. Their tests were becoming more successful, the rifts lasting longer, growing slightly larger. But the tests had side effects. The massive energy discharges were causing electrical problems throughout Hawkins, making lights flicker and electronics malfunction. This is what first tips off the main characters that something weird is happening. Dustin's new girlfriend Susie's radio equipment picks up a Russian transmission, and he realizes that the Russians are secretly operating in Hawkins. The discovery of the base leads to one of the show's most intense sequences. Steve, Dustin, Robin, and Erica sneak into the facility, get captured, get tortured a bit, and eventually escape with help from the others. Meanwhile, they learn that the Russians aren't just trying to open a gate, they're working with, or at least aware of, the Mind Flayer's presence. The piece of the mind flayer that got trapped in Hawkins when the gate closed in Season 2 has been active, possessing people and building the flesh monster. And it's waiting for the Russians to reopen the gate, so it can reconnect with the main body of the mind flayer still in the Upside Down. It's all connected, this conspiracy within a conspiracy where the Russian scientific ambitions are accidentally helping an interdimensional monster. In the Season 3 finale, Hopper and Joyce fight their way to the key's control room. They realize the only way to stop the gates from fully opening is to destroy the machine. The problem is, the key has multiple systems, and just turning it off isn't enough. They need to overload it, cause it to catastrophically fail. Hopper understands this means whoever's in the control room probably won't make it out. He and Joyce have this heartbreaking moment where he basically tells her to turn the keys that will destroy the machine and kill him in the process. She does it, the key explodes, and Hopper seems to die in the blast. The gate that was forming collapses, and the connection to the Upside Down is severed again. The flesh monster, cut off from its power source, loses coherence and collapses. But we learn in Season 4 that Hopper didn't actually die. He survived the blast, probably because he jumped into some kind of access tunnel, or was blown clear at the last second. Unfortunately, he was then captured by surviving Russian soldiers and taken back to the Soviet Union as a prisoner. This leads to his imprisonment in a brutal gulag in Kamchatka, where political prisoners and other undesirables are kept. The Kamchatka facility is significant because it's connected to the Soviet Upside Down program. Remember how I mentioned the Russians had tried to open a gate in their own country? They succeeded, at least briefly, before the Hawkins operation was shut down. Using that brief access, they managed to capture some creatures from the Upside Down, including a fully grown Demogorgon and some demo dogs. These creatures are kept in a prison complex and used for a horrifying purpose. The guards feed prisoners to the Demogorgon as a form of execution. They call it fighting the monster, frame it as if the prisoner has a chance, but really, it's just a sadistic death sentence. The creature is kept in a frozen environment, presumably because they learned that the upside-down creatures are vulnerable to heat and they want to keep it comfortable and controllable. Hopper survives in this gulag by being useful, doing hard labor and staying out of trouble. But eventually, he's selected to fight the Demogorgon. That's when Joyce and Murray, who've learned he's alive, mount a rescue operation. They sneak into the Soviet Union, break Hopper out, and in the process they discover the extent of the Russian upside-down program. The Kamchatka facility has specimens, research, documentation on the upside down. It's clear the Russians have been studying this for years, probably since they first learned about it in the early 1980s. They have scientists trying to understand the dimensional physics, biologists studying the creatures, military strategists trying to figure out how to weaponize all of it. It's basically what Hawkins' lab was doing, but on the Soviet side, with all the brutality and disregard for human life you'd expect from that era's USSR. The facility even has what they call Watergate, a small but apparently stable gate that they're keeping open in a containment chamber. It's proof that gates can exist outside of Hawkins, which has massive implications. The resolution of the Russian storyline in Season 4 involves Hopper, Joyce and Murray working with some of the prisoners to create a distraction and shut down the Kamchatka facility. They release the Demogorgon and other creatures, causing chaos and giving them a chance to escape. The creatures rampage through the facility, killing guards and scientists. The facility is badly damaged, possibly destroyed entirely, though we don't see the full aftermath. What we do know is that Hopper, Joyce and Murray make it out alive and eventually return to America. The Russian program raises some really troubling questions, though. How much does the Soviet government know about the Upside Down? Is it just a rogue military program, or is it official policy? Are there other facilities we haven't seen? And now that the Cold War is ending, which is the historical period Season 4 is set in, What happens to all this research and these captured creatures? Do they get shut down, or do they get privatized and sold to the highest bidder? The show doesn't answer these questions, which leaves them hanging ominously over the narrative. I think the Russian subplot works really well because it shows that the threat of the Upside Down isn't just local to Hawkins. It's a global concern. Multiple governments know about it, multiple groups are trying to exploit it, and the secrecy surrounding it means there's no international cooperation or oversight. Everyone's working in the shadows, pursuing their own agendas, and that makes the situation even more dangerous. If countries cooperated, shared research, maybe they could find a way to permanently seal off the Upside Down, or at least defend against it more effectively. But cooperation requires transparency, and transparency is the first casualty in any conspiracy. The Russians also serve as a reminder that human greed and ambition are just as dangerous as any monster. Vecna and the Mind Flayer are threats, obviously, but they're not coming through gates on their own. Those gates are opened by humans, by scientists and soldiers, and politicians who think they can control forces they don't understand. The Russians are the late Cold War's last gasp of paranoia and ambition, and it nearly cost them everything. It's a proper cautionary tale about the dangers of messing with things better left alone. But Hawkins' lab and the Russians weren't the only ones continuing to study the Upside Down and psychic powers. Even after everything that happened, even after the lab was supposedly shut down, Brenner was still working on ways to restore and enhance psychic abilities. Because even after Hawkins' lab closed, even after everything, Brenner built another facility. Let's talk about the Nina project. Now, one of the most unsettling reveals in Season 4 was that Dr. Brenner never stopped. He survived the Demogorgon attack at the end of Season 1, though he was badly injured. And instead of retiring or being shut down by the government, he convinced them to fund a new project. The Nina project was built in a remote location in the Nevada desert, far from prying eyes, and its stated purpose was to help Eleven recover her lost powers. Eleven had been powerless since the end of Season 3, remember. She'd burned out her abilities fighting the flesh monster and closing the Russian gate. For months, she tried to access her powers and couldn't. Nothing worked. She'd lost the thing that made her special, the thing that made her feel useful and powerful. When Dr. Owens, who'd taken over coordination of the government's response to the Upside Down, approached her about Nina, he framed it as her only chance to get her abilities back. And with Vecna's curse killing people in Hawkins, Eleven felt desperate to help. So she agreed to go. The Nina Project facility is built to look a bit like a military outpost, camouflaged and secure. Inside it's got high-tech equipment, monitoring systems, and at the centre, the Nina device itself. Nina is an advanced version of the sensory deprivation technology, combined with something new, memory immersion tech. The idea is that Eleven's powers are locked behind trauma, specifically the trauma of the 1979 massacre at Hawkins' lab when she fought Henry Creel and banished him to the Upside Down. She'd repressed those memories, blocked them out because they were too painful, and in doing so, she'd also blocked access to her abilities. Nina works by putting Eleven into a controlled memory state where she relives her past. It's like virtual reality mixed with hypnosis, mixed with sensory deprivation. She's placed in a tank-like device filled with some kind of conductive solution, and her brain is stimulated to recall specific memories in vivid detail. From her perspective, she's literally back in Hawkins' lab as a child, experiencing events as they happened. She sees herself as a young girl, interacts with her younger self, watches the events unfold. It's deeply disorienting and psychologically intense. What makes it work is that, by confronting and reintegrating those traumatic memories, Eleven can access the emotional and mental state she was in when her powers were at their peak. She reconnects with that younger version of herself, the scared but powerful child who fought back against Henry. And through that reconnection, her abilities begin to return. It's like the memories are the key that unlocks the door to her powers, but the process is brutal. Reliving the massacre is horrifying. She has to watch Henry kill the other children, has to experience her terror and rage and desperate fight to survive. She has to remember things she'd buried, including the fact that she's the one who opened the first gate, that she's responsible for everything that's happened with the Upside Down. That guilt weighs on her, but working through it is part of the healing process. Dr. Owens and his team monitor her vitals and adjust the Nina program to keep her safe, but there's only so much they can do. The work is internal, and Eleven has to do it herself. Brenner's role in Nina is complicated. He presents himself as a caring father figure again, calling Eleven his daughter, insisting that everything he's doing is for her benefit. But it's manipulative. He wants her powers back not just to help her, but because he sees her as his greatest achievement, his proof that his methods work. There's this scene where Eleven confronts him, tells him she remembers everything now, remembers how he kept her prisoner, how he tortured her and the other children, how he's the reason so many of them died. And Brenner deflects. He says he did what was necessary, that he was protecting her, that she doesn't understand the bigger picture. It's classic abuser logic, reframing cruelty as care. The Nina facility doesn't stay safe for long. The military finds out about it, and they have conflicting orders. Some faction wants Eleven kept secure and used as a weapon. Another faction thinks she's too dangerous and wants her locked up or neutralized. There's this whole power struggle happening in the government about how to handle the upside-down situation, and Eleven's caught in the middle. When military forces raid the Nina facility, a firefight breaks out. Brenner tries to evacuate Eleven, but he's shot in the process. He dies in front of her, still insisting that he loved her, that everything he did was for her. And Eleven, finally free of his manipulation, just walks away. She doesn't forgive him. She doesn't give him the closure he wants. She just leaves him to die, which is a powerful moment of reclaiming her agency. By the time the Nina project concludes, Eleven has fully recovered her powers, maybe even enhanced them. She's stronger than she was before because now she understands herself better. She's integrated her trauma instead of running from it. And she's ready to face Vecna, to finish what she started when she banished Henry to the Upside Down all those years ago. The memory of their fight, of how she pushed him through the dimensional barrier, gives her insight into how to potentially defeat him now. I think Nina represents the evolution of the original Hawkins lab experiments. Instead of creating powers through drugs and torture, it's using psychological techniques and advanced technology to unlock existing abilities. It's less outright evil than Brenner's earlier work, but it's still ethically questionable. They're manipulating Eleven's memories, putting her through controlled trauma, all in service of making her into a more effective weapon. Dr. Owens justifies it by saying the stakes are too high, that they need 11 at full power to stop Vecna. And he's not wrong about the stakes, but the ends justifies the means logic is the same thinking that led to the abuses at Hawkins' lab in the first place. The Nina project also shows that the government still doesn't understand what they're dealing with. They think this is a problem that can be solved with better technology and more powerful psychics. But the Upside Down isn't a problem that can be solved with force. It's a consequence of the original sin of opening that first gate, of treating human beings as experimental subjects, of prioritizing power and control over ethics and caution. Until they grapple with that underlying issue, they're just going to keep making the same mistakes in new forms. Nina represents the evolution of the original experiments, but Hawkins itself is full of important locations that have played huge roles throughout the series. The various places in town where battles were fought, secrets were hidden, and normal life tried to continue despite the horror. Since we've been talking so much about secret facilities, let's explore the actual town of Hawkins and all the locations that have become significant throughout the show's run. Now, Hawkins might seem like a typical small Midwestern town on the surface, but pretty much every major location has played some role in the interdimensional horror that's consumed this place. Let's take a tour of the important spots and talk about why they matter. The Wheeler house is probably the most frequently seen location besides the central locations. It's this typical suburban home, nice but not fancy, with a basement that becomes the de facto headquarters for the party. Mike's basement is where they play D&D, where they hide 11 in Season 1, where they make plans and strategize. It's supposed to be a safe space, a place where kids can just be kids. But even there, the horror intrudes. The Demogorgon attacks through the walls. Will's connection to the Upside Down causes disturbances. It's a reminder that in Hawkins, nowhere is truly safe. The basement represents childhood and innocence, but that innocence is constantly under threat. The Byers house is another critical location, especially in Season 1. This is where Joyce creates her Christmas lights communication system to talk to Will when he's trapped in the Upside Down. The whole house becomes this sort of shrine to her missing son, walls covered in lights, each bulb a letter, the alphabet spelled out so Will can send messages by making specific lights glow. It's brilliant and heartbreaking, this mother's desperate attempt to reach her child across dimensional boundaries. The Byers house is always a bit run down, reflecting the family's financial struggles. Joyce is a single mum, working retail, and trying to raise 2 boys. They don't have a lot, but they have love. And that love is what drives Joyce to never give up on Will, even when everyone else thinks he's dead. When Will is possessed by the Mind Flayer in Season 2, the Byers house becomes the site of the exorcism I described earlier. They seal it up, crank the heat, and basically turn it into a sauna to drive the entity out of Will's body. Later, in Season 4, we see the house in the Upside Down, frozen in time from 1983, covered in vines and decay. Nancy uses Will's old drawings and messages to communicate with the group. In the real world, shining a flashlight through the upside-down version of the house to make the lights flicker in the real version. It's a callback to Joyce's communication system, using light to bridge dimensions. Hopper's cabin is where 11 lives, in Season 2 and part of Season 3. It's isolated in the woods, which makes it perfect for hiding a girl the government is looking for. Hopper sets up traps and alarms around the property to warn him if anyone's approaching. Inside it's cramped and messy, very much a bachelor pad, but it becomes a home for 11. She and Hopper develop this father-daughter relationship that's honestly one of the show's best dynamics. He's overprotective and gruff. She's rebellious and testing boundaries, but underneath it all, there's genuine love. The cabin represents safety and family for 11, which makes its destruction at the end of Season 3 all the more tragic. When the government raids it looking for her, they tear it apart, ruining the one place she felt like she belonged. The Palace Arcade is the hangout spot for the kids in Season 2. It's this classic 1980s arcade, loud and colourful, full of video games and pinball machines. The kids meet there, play Dragon's Lair and Dig Dug, and try to have normal teenage experiences. Keith, the older teenager who works there, is this stereotypical, surly nerd who gives them attitude. The arcade represents normalcy, the world of childhood fun that exists in parallel to the supernatural horror. It's where the kids can forget about monsters and gates for a little while and just be kids. Of course, even the arcade gets invaded by the story, when Dart, the baby Demogorgon Dustin's been hiding, escapes and causes chaos. Starcourt Mall is the big new development in Season 3, and it's built to be this shining symbol of American capitalism and consumerism in the 1980s. The mall is bright and modern, with stores like Gap and Scoops Ahoy, a movie theatre, and a food court. It represents the death of small-town Main Street businesses. We see the local shops struggling because everyone's going to the mall instead. Mayor Klein has been bribed or influenced to support the mall's construction, not knowing that underneath it, the Russians are building their facility. The mall becomes the site of the final battle in Season 3, with the flesh monster attacking it. The Scoops troop fighting their way through the Russian base, and ultimately, the building being destroyed when Hopper sabotages the key device. By season 4, Starcourt is just a burned-out ruin, a monument to the destruction that's becoming increasingly hard to hide from the public. Hawkins High School is where the older teens spend their time. It's a typical American high school with its social hierarchies and teen drama. Nancy and Jonathan work on the school newspaper. Steve struggles with his post-graduation directionlessness. In season 4, Eddie Munson runs the Hellfire Club there, the D&D group that carries on Mike's love of the game. The school is also where some of Vecna's curse victims die, or nearly die. Chrissy is killed at Eddie's trailer, but the school is where her trauma and suffering began, where she experienced the eating disorder and social pressure that made her vulnerable to Vecna. Patrick dies during a trip to the lake with the basketball team. The school represents adolescence and all the pressures and pain that come with it, which makes it thematically appropriate that Vecna targets teenagers dealing with trauma from that environment. Hawkins Community Pool is where Billy works as a lifeguard in season 3, and it's where he first gets possessed by the Mind Flayer. The pool is supposed to be a fun summer spot, but it becomes sinister when we realise Billy's been taken over. There's this scene where the possessed Billy sits in his lifeguard chair, watching everyone, and you can see how cold and predatory he's become. The pool also represents a certain kind of 1980s aesthetic, the chlorine and suntan oil, the teenage social dynamics, the hierarchy where Billy reigns as the attractive but dangerous older boy. When the pool is closed later in the season due to contaminated water, which is actually the chemicals the flayed have been drinking to prepare their bodies for melting, it's one more sign that things are falling apart. The quarry is on the outskirts of town, and it's used multiple times throughout the series. In season 1, the fake Will body is supposedly found at the bottom of the quarry. The labs attempt to convince everyone he's dead. The kids go there to investigate, and it becomes clear the body is staged. In later seasons, the quarry serves as a desolate location where characters can go to be alone or to dump things they don't want found. It's one of those liminal spaces, not quite nature and not quite civilization, that fits the show's themes of things hidden just out of sight. Lover's Lake is introduced in season 4 as the location of Watergate, one of the gates that opens after Patrick is killed by Vecna. The lake has this local legend attached to it, a romantic name for what's essentially just a lake where teenagers go to make out. But when the gate opens at the bottom of the lake, it becomes a portal to the upside down. Eddie, Steve, Nancy and Robin have to dive down into the cold water and swim through the gate to reach the other side. It's one of the most visually striking sequences in the series, transitioning from the dark water to the alien landscape of the upside down. Melvald's General Store is where Joyce works. It's a small local shop, the kind that's struggling to compete with Starcourt Mall. We see Joyce dealing with difficult customers and money problems, trying to make ends meet. The store represents the economic reality of small-town life, the people who are just trying to survive and provide for their families. It grounds the show's supernatural elements in a recognizable working-class reality. Family Video is where Steve and Robin work in season 4 after Scoops Ahoy was destroyed. It's a video rental store, another very 1980s business. They spend their shifts recommending movies, gossiping about their lives, and gradually getting pulled into the Vecna situation. The store represents the mundane jobs that teens and young adults work while figuring out their futures. It's also where Steve has his big realization about wanting a family, talking to Robin about his dreams of having a bunch of kids and being a good dad someday. It's sweet and surprisingly vulnerable for a character who started the series as a stereotypical jock. What's cool about all these locations is how they're not just backdrops. They're characters in themselves, places with histories and atmospheres that contribute to the story. The show uses location really effectively to create mood. Hopper's cabin feels isolated and safe. The arcade feels loud and chaotic and youthful. Starcourt Mall feels commercial and fake. The buyer's house feels lived in and struggling. Each place tells you something about the characters who inhabit it and about the town as a whole. Hawkins itself is built around this idea of typical American small-town life being interrupted by cosmic horror. The locations are all recognizable, the kind of places that exist in thousands of towns across the Midwest. That familiarity makes the supernatural elements more disturbing because they're invading spaces that feel safe and normal. Your local mall, your high school, your neighborhood pool, these aren't supposed to be dangerous. But in Hawkins, nowhere is safe. The horror can erupt anywhere, at any time. These locations make Hawkins feel real and lived in. But there's one location that stands above the rest in terms of pure horror significance. The Creel House. Speaking of creepy locations, we need to talk about the house that started it all for Vecna. The Creel House, site of the 1959 murders, and Season 4's primary investigation target. Let's talk about one of the most unsettling locations in all of Stranger Things. The Creel House, this abandoned mansion that holds the key to understanding Vecna's origins. And honestly, everything about this place is designed to be properly disturbing. The Creel House is this big old Victorian-style home on the outskirts of Hawkins. It's been abandoned since 1959, since the night Virginia and Alice Creel were murdered there. The house has this reputation in town as being haunted or cursed. Kids tell stories about it, dare each other to go inside, but no one actually wants to live there. It's been on the market for decades, the price dropping lower and lower, but still no buyers, because even people who don't believe in curses can feel that there's something wrong about the place. The exterior is all peeling paint, broken windows, overgrown yard. It looks like something from a horror movie, even before you know its history. The inside is even worse. Dust and decay everywhere, furniture covered in sheets, wallpaper hanging off in strips. In Season 4, when Nancy, Steve, Robin, Eddie and Dustin investigate the house, they find it preserved in this state of arrested decay. Nothing's been touched or moved in decades. It's like a time capsule of 1959, but rotted. What really makes the Creel House significant is the grandfather clock. There's this huge ornate grandfather clock in the house, and it becomes a symbol of Vecna's curse. His victims see the clock in their visions before they die. They'll be going about their day, and suddenly they see this clock that doesn't belong there, appearing in impossible places. It's a warning that Vecna has marked them. The clock represents time running out, death approaching, and its design, all dark wood and intricate carvings, gives it this oppressive presence. When it chimes, it's this deep, ominous sound that fills the victim with dread. The connection between the clock and Vecna is tied to Henry's time in the house. As a child, Henry was fascinated by the clock. He'd stand in front of it, listening to its mechanisms, using its steady ticking to focus his psychic abilities. The clock became associated with his power, with his sense of control and order. So when he became Vecna, he incorporated the clock into his curse as a calling card. It's his way of announcing himself, of letting his victims know that they're being hunted. In one of Season 4's most iconic sequences, Max is trapped in one of Vecna's visions, and she's running through a nightmare version of the Creel House, trying to escape. The hallways stretch impossibly long, doors lead to nothing, and everywhere she turns there's the clock, ticking, chiming, counting down to her death. Her friends are trying to save her in the real world by playing her favourite song, and the music cuts through the vision, giving her a thread to follow back to reality. She finds a portal in the vision, a doorway filled with red light, and she runs toward it as fast as she can. The Creel House crumbling around her and Vecna chasing her. She makes it through at the last second, collapsing back into her body just before Vecna can kill her. It's such a tense, beautifully shot sequence that uses the Creel House as this physical manifestation of psychological trauma. The Creel house also exists in the Upside Down, which makes sense given that it's been a significant location in Hawkins since before the Upside Down was shaped into its current form. Vecna uses the Upside Down version of the house as his lair. He's nested there, his body literally connected to the house through vines and tendrils. The attic of the Creel house in the Upside Down is where Vecna physically resides when he's not possessing or cursing people. It's covered in red light, more organic growth, and it pulses like a heart. The house has become an extension of Vecna himself, as much a part of him as his own body. When Nancy gets briefly trapped in a vision by Vecna, he brings her to the Creel house in the Upside Down. He shows her his memories, his perspective on the 1959 murders. He wants her to understand what he did and why. It's this twisted attempt at connection, like he wants someone to see him as he sees himself, as a visionary rather than a monster. Nancy, being Nancy, isn't having it. She sees through him, recognizes that he's just a killer with delusions of grandeur. But the experience gives her crucial information that she shares with the others later, helping them understand Vecna's plan and motivation. The real history of the house, what actually happened there in 1959, is gradually revealed across Season 4. The Creel family moved in, and almost immediately, strange things started happening. Lights flickering, doors slamming, visions of disturbing imagery. Victor thought the house was haunted. He'd seen a lot of death in World War II, and he believed that maybe he'd brought something dark back with him, some curse or connection to death. But it wasn't the house, and it wasn't Victor. It was Henry, using his powers unconsciously at first and then deliberately to torment his family. The night of the murders, Henry targeted his mother and sister. He killed them using his psychic abilities, breaking their bones and crushing their eyes, which would later become his signature method. His father Victor survived only because Henry wanted him to live with the guilt and confusion. Victor was found at the scene, catatonic with horror, and he was convicted of the murders. He spent the rest of his life in a psychiatric hospital, insisting that a demon killed his family. In Season 4, Nancy and Robin interview the now elderly Victor in the hospital, and he tells them his version of events. He genuinely believes a demon did it, and in a way, he's not wrong. His son had become something demonic. What makes the Creel house so effective as a horror location is how it layers history and symbolism. It's the site of family tragedy, a haunted house, in the classic sense, a serial killer's lair, and a dimensional gateway, all at once. It embodies all the show's themes, the corruption of domestic spaces, the sins of the past infecting the present, the thin line between the normal and the supernatural. And it's genuinely creepy in a traditional horror way that grounds the show, even when it's dealing with interdimensional monsters and psychic powers. I think the house also represents what Vecna wants to do to all of reality. He wants to take something normal and alive, a family home, and turn it into something twisted and dead, but still animated, still full of a dark purpose. The Creel house is his vision of the world. Everything decayed and broken, but under his control, his will imposed on reality itself. The house is both his prison and his throne room, the place he's trapped, but also the place where he rules. The Creel house is where it all began for Henry, and it's where the final confrontation with Vecna makes sense thematically. You defeat a monster by returning to where it was made, but before Henry became Vecna, he spent years in another significant location. Since we're on the topic of important buildings, we need to return to where most of this started, the various levels and secret areas of Hawkins' lab, including the infamous Rainbow Room. So for all the time we spend at Hawkins' lab across the series, the actual layout and structure of the place is really fascinating when you start thinking about it. It's basically this multi-level secret research facility hiding under a Department of Energy cover story, and the different levels represent different degrees of secrecy and how deep into the conspiracy you're allowed to go. The surface level of Hawkins' lab is all legitimate, or at least it appears to be. There are offices for Department of Energy staff, research areas doing actual energy-related work probably, enough real activity to maintain the cover story. If you're a regular employee working on solar panels or nuclear safety protocols or whatever, you never see anything suspicious. You clock in, do your job, clock out, and you think you're working for a normal government facility. The security is explained away as standard for any DOE building dealing with potentially sensitive information. But below the surface levels, that's where the real work happens. The numbered children were kept in sublevels, floors underground, where visitors would never go. These levels required higher security clearance, armed guards, checkpoints with biometric scanners. You couldn't just wander into these areas accidentally. And the deeper you went, the more secret the work became. The Rainbow Room is probably the most significant location within the lab. It's called that because it was decorated cheerfully, an attempt to make it seem less prison-like for the children held there. The walls were painted with rainbows, colours everywhere, toys and games available. It was supposed to be a play area, a classroom, a living space all in one. But the cheerful decorations make it more disturbing, not less because you know what was really happening there. The children were being trained, tested, sometimes punished. They lived in fear of Brenner, who they called Papa, never knowing if he'd be kind or cruel on any given day. In the flashbacks to 1979, we see the Rainbow Room on the day of the massacre. There are maybe a dozen children there, all wearing hospital gowns, with their numbers embroidered on them. They're doing exercises, moving objects with their minds, competing against each other, while Brenner observes and takes notes. The atmosphere is tense. The children are afraid of failing, afraid of punishment, desperate to please Papa, so he'll be gentle with them. It's a deeply messed up dynamic, children seeking approval from their abuser, because they have no other option. The massacre happens in the Rainbow Room. Henry, after 11 removes his power-suppressing implant, goes there and systematically kills the other children. The Rainbow Room becomes a slaughterhouse, blood everywhere, bodies broken and scattered. It's one of the most brutal scenes in the show's history, made more disturbing by the contrast between the cheerful decor and the violence. The fact that this is where children were supposed to feel safe, and instead it becomes the site of their murder, drives home the horror of what Brenner created. Below the Rainbow Room were other areas. The sensory deprivation tank room, where 11 and others would go to enhance their remote viewing abilities. Containment cells, for when children misbehaved or when they were being isolated for testing. Medical facilities where the children would be examined, drugged, fitted with monitoring equipment. And at the very bottom, the deepest level, was where the original gate opened in 1983. That chamber was heavily reinforced, designed to contain whatever might come through if their experiments went wrong, which obviously they did. The original gate chamber is described as being like a bunker, thick concrete walls, blast doors, emergency shutdown systems. When the gate opened, it started growing, the upside down literally infecting the physical space around it. The walls near the gate became covered in vines and organic growth. The temperature dropped. The chamber became less like a room and more like an extension of the other dimension. By the time we see it in Season 2, the gate has expanded to take up most of the chamber, this pulsing organic tear in reality, with tendrils spreading out from it. The security protocols at the lab were extensive. Multiple checkpoints between levels, security cameras everywhere, guards with orders to shoot intruders on sight. Brenner ran the place like a military installation, because in essence, that's what it was. The children weren't allowed to leave their designated areas without supervision. They were prisoners, even if the Rainbow Room tried to disguise that fact. The only time they went outside was under strict supervision, and even then, they were confined to a courtyard surrounded by high fences. After the events of Season 1, the lab was officially shut down. The Department of Energy made statements about decommissioning the facility, relocating staff, ending certain research programs. But as we learn later, that was mostly theatre. The really sensitive work just moved elsewhere, to the Nina Project facility and probably other locations we haven't seen. The building itself was sealed up, declared a hazardous site due to chemical contamination, which was the cover story for the gate and the upside-down infiltration. Guards were posted to keep people out, though by season 2 those guards are dealing with journalists and conspiracy theorists trying to break in and find out what really happened. Fun fact about the lab's design. The show filmed many of the lab scenes at real locations that were former mental hospitals or institutional buildings. Those spaces have this inherent unsettling quality, the long empty hallways, the institutional lighting, the sense of people being confined and controlled. It gives the lab scenes an authentic atmosphere that set dressing alone couldn't achieve. The Rainbow Room and the other secret areas of the lab represent the show's commentary on government overreach and the abuse of power. These were children, vulnerable and powerless, being used as weapons and test subjects by adults who convinced themselves they were doing something important. The cheerful decor of the Rainbow Room, the way Brenner plays at being a father figure, it's all manipulation, a way to control the children by offering them the bare minimum of affection and normalcy. The lab is where Eleven's trauma began, and it's also where she found the strength to fight back, first against Henry, and later against all the other threats she'd face. The lab represents the cold, clinical side of the horror in Stranger Things. It's not supernatural. It's human beings doing terrible things to each other for power and control. But throughout the series, we also see the warm, safe places where the characters find refuge. Since we've talked so much about the dangerous locations, let's discuss the safe houses, the places where the party regroups, where plans are made, and where they try to have normal lives between crises. Throughout Stranger Things, the characters need safe places to regroup, to plan, and to just try to be normal for a little while. Let's talk about the various safe houses and hideouts that have played important roles across the seasons. Hopper's cabin, which I mentioned earlier, is the primary safe house in seasons 2 and 3. After 11 escapes from the lab in season 1 and spends time living with Mike's family briefly, she needs somewhere more secure, somewhere the government won't find her. Hopper offers his grandfather's old cabin in the woods. It's isolated, off any main roads, easy to defend and monitor. He sets up a perimeter with traps and alarms, stuff that'll make noise if anyone approaches so he'll know they're coming. Inside, the cabin is small and rustic, one main room serving as kitchen, living room, and dining area. A couple of bedrooms, a bathroom, not much else. But Hopper tries to make it comfortable for 11. He brings her food, books, clothes. He sets up a TV and finds channels she can watch. Slowly, the cabin becomes a home. 11 learns to cook, practices her powers in the woods, and deals with being isolated from her friends. It's not an ideal situation, keeping her hidden away, but it's safe, and that matters. The cabin also becomes the place where Hopper and 11 work through their relationship. He's overprotective, setting strict rules about what she can and can't do. She's rebellious, frustrated by the limitations. They fight, they reconcile, they develop genuine love for each other. The cabin represents that found family dynamic, two broken people creating something like normalcy together. When the cabin is raided and destroyed at the end of season 3, it's not just a place that's lost. It's a home, and the destruction of it marks the end of that period of relative safety and stability in Eleven's life. The Wheeler basement is another critical safe space. Mike's basement is where the original party met to play D&D long before the events of season 1. It's got all the accoutrements of a proper D&D setup. Tables, character sheets, miniatures, and Mike's throne-like chair, where he DMs campaigns. When 11 needs to hide in season 1, Mike brings her to the basement. The party hides her there, keeps her secret from adults, and tries to help her while also dealing with their own feelings about having a girl with superpowers in their midst. The basement becomes headquarters. It's where they plan their investigations, where they listen to radio communications, where they gather to compare notes on what they've learned. Mrs. Wheeler occasionally brings them snacks, unaware that she's feeding a fugitive psychic girl who's being hunted by the government. The normalcy of the space, the domesticity of it, makes it feel safe. These are just kids hanging out in a basement, playing games and eating snacks. Except they're also fighting monsters and solving interdimensional conspiracies. The contrast is part of what makes the show work. You get these cozy, relatable moments in between the horror, and those moments mostly happen in places like the Wheeler basement. In season 4, after Eleven moves to California, the house she lives in with the Byers family becomes a new safe space, at least briefly. It's a small house in Lenora Hills, cheaper than anything they could afford in Hawkins. Joyce is working hard to provide for the family, and Hopper's death has hit them all hard. Eleven struggles to fit in at her new school, bullied by kids who sense she's different. The house is supposed to represent a fresh start, away from all the trauma of Hawkins. But of course, the trauma follows them. When Eleven is arrested after hitting her bully with a roller skate, when Dr. Owens appears and recruits her for the Nina project, it becomes clear that there's no running from their past. Max's trailer in season 4 is significant as a safe space that isn't quite safe enough. Max and her mum live in the Forest Hills trailer park, which is on the poorer side of town. After Billy's death, Max has been dealing with depression and guilt, isolating herself from her friends. The trailer is where she retreats, where she listens to her music too loud and tries to block out the world. It's supposed to be her refuge, but it's also where Vecna begins targeting her. She experiences the first signs of his curse there. The headaches, the nosebleeds, the visions. The trailer can't protect her from a threat that exists inside her own mind. By the end of season 4, when Max is in a coma at the hospital, her home feels even more empty and sad, a reminder of the girl, who might not come back. Eddie Munson's trailer is where Chrissy is killed, which immediately makes it unsafe. Eddie, terrified and on the run, can't go home because it's a crime scene. He hides out at Reefer Rick's place, a lakeside house belonging to his drug supplier, who's currently in jail. The house is isolated and neglected, perfect for laying low. Eddie holds up there, listening to the news reports that are painting him as a satanic killer, trying to figure out what to do. When Steve, Dustin, Max and Robin find him hiding in Rick's boathouse, they convince him to trust them, and the boathouse becomes another temporary safe space where they can talk and plan without being seen. The Surfer Boy pizza place in California is where Jonathan works, and it becomes a gathering point for the California crew in season 4. More importantly, the Surfer Boy pizza van becomes a mobile safe space. When they need to transport Eleven from Nevada back to Hawkins, when they need to keep moving and avoid government agents and police, they pile into that van. Argyle, Jonathan's stoner co-worker, drives them across the country in this bright yellow pizza delivery van that absolutely should not be inconspicuous, but somehow gets them where they need to go. The van represents the journey, the idea that safety isn't always a place. Sometimes it's just being together, moving toward a goal, trusting each other. Murray Bauman's bunker is introduced in season 2 when Hopper and Joyce recruit him to help translate Russian documents. Murray is this former journalist turned paranoid conspiracy theorist, living alone in a fortified house filled with surveillance equipment and weapons. He's cynical and prickly, but ultimately good-hearted. His place becomes a safe house several times across the series. In season 3, Joyce and Hopper meet there to plan their investigation of the magnets and the Russian conspiracy. In season 4, it's where Joyce, Murray, and eventually Hopper coordinate their efforts to stop Vecna from California and then Russia. Murray's bunker is properly equipped for spy stuff, which makes it ideal for the cloak and dagger work the adults end up doing. Steve's house is this big empty mansion where his parents are never home. In season 2, It's where Steve and the kids hole up after being attacked by demo dogs. In Season 3, the pool in Steve's backyard becomes a hangout spot. The emptiness of the house is sad in a way. Steve has money and space, but no real family presence. His parents are always travelling for work, leaving him alone. But that emptiness also makes the house useful as a safe space. No adults around to ask questions or interfere when weird supernatural stuff is happening. The video store back room, where Steve and Robin work in Season 4, isn't exactly a hideout, but it becomes a place where the group can meet and talk without attracting attention. They huddle in the back, surrounded by videotapes, discussing Vecna and curses and gates, while Keith, their manager, remains oblivious in the front. It's another example of how the show layers the normal and supernatural, having these intense conversations about life and death in the break room of a retail job. What strikes me about all these safe spaces is how temporary they are. Nothing stays safe forever. The cabin gets raided. The Wheelers' basement can't protect them from the bigger threats. Trailers and boathouses are just places to hide until the next crisis. Even Hawkins itself stops being safe by Season 4, with multiple gates opening and the upside down beginning to bleed through into the real world. The characters are constantly being displaced, forced to find new shelters, adapt to new situations. But the safe spaces aren't really about the physical locations. They're about the people you're with. The party feels safe when they're together, whether that's in a basement or a van or a Russian bunker. Joyce, Hopper, and Murray create safety through partnership and shared purpose. 11 feels safe with Hopper, not because of the cabin, but because he loves her. The show consistently reinforces that safety is about relationships and trust, not about having a secure building with good locks. These safe spaces remind us that, underneath all the horror, Stranger Things is about friendship and found family. But let's get back to the monsters. Because across 4 seasons we've seen a wild variety of creatures and threats, and each one has been defeated in different ways. Since we've covered the locations where our heroes plan their attacks, let's create a timeline of every major monster and threat they've faced, season by season. Now, one of the things that makes Stranger Things so engaging is how the threats evolve and escalate with each season. Let's walk through every major monster and how the party has had to adapt their tactics to survive. Season 1 begins with the original Demogorgon. This creature is introduced as an unknown horror, something that snatched Will Byers into the Upside Down and is now hunting in Hawkins. The Demogorgon is drawn to blood, using it to track prey across dimensions. When 11 gets a nosebleed from using her powers, the creature homes in on her. When Barbara Holland is injured by Steve's pool, the Demogorgon takes her. It's this constant threat that can appear anywhere, strike without warning, and retreat to the Upside Down where humans can't follow. The original Demogorgon kills several people across Season 1. Barb's death is particularly tragic because she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Lab scientists and guards also die when the creature escapes through the gate. The Demogorgon's hunting pattern becomes central to understanding how to fight it. The kids realize that it uses dimensions to travel, appearing to teleport but actually moving through the Upside Down and emerging elsewhere. This gives them an idea. If they can lure it to a specific location, trap it there, they might be able to kill it or at least contain it. The final confrontation with the Demogorgon happens at Hawkins Middle School. The creature has tracked 11 and the boys there, intent on killing them. In one of the series' most iconic moments, 11 uses her powers to disintegrate the Demogorgon. She physically crushes it with telekinesis while also sending it somewhere. The effort is so immense that 11 herself disappears in the process, seemingly dissolving into particles along with the creature. We later learn she was pulled into the Upside Down by the force of what she did. But from the boys' perspective, both 11 and the monster just vanish. It's a proper, heroic sacrifice moment that sets the template for how 11's powers work. She's immensely strong, but using that strength comes at a cost. Season 2 introduces new threats and variations on the Demogorgon concept. The demo dogs are adolescent demogorgons, smaller and more pack-oriented than the full-grown version. Dart, the creature Dustin finds and tries to keep as a pet, is a demo dog in its early stages. Watching Dart's progression shows us the life cycle of these creatures. They start as slug-like pollywogs, then grow legs and become dog-sized, eventually maturing into full demogorgons. Dart's story is interesting because he develops a bond with Dustin. Even after becoming a dangerous predator, Dart remembers Dustin feeding him nougat, and in a crucial moment, he lets the party pass by without attacking them. It's a brief hint that these creatures aren't completely mindless, that individual memory and experience can override the hive mind's commands, at least temporarily. The demo dog pack attacks Hawkins' lab at the end of Season 2, overwhelming the security and killing Bob Newby in one of the show's most heartbreaking deaths. Bob was just a sweet, nerdy guy who loved Joyce and tried to help the kids, and he dies buying them time to escape. The demo dogs are relentless, fast, and when they hunt as a pack, nearly unstoppable. The only thing that saves the main characters is Eleven arriving and using her powers to fend them off, long enough for everyone to escape. But the real threat in Season 2 is the Mind Flayer itself, the shadow monster that appears in the sky of the Upside Down. Will is the first to see it in his now memories. It's massive, spider-like, composed of darkness and reaching across the horizon. The Mind Flayer doesn't just hunt, it possesses. It gets inside Will, using him as a spy, learning everything about Hawkins and the people fighting it. The strategy to defeat it involves a two-pronged attack. First, close the gate so the Mind Flayer can't send more creatures through or maintain its full connection to the possessed Will. Second, use heat to drive the piece of the Mind Flayer out of Will's body. Both strategies work, but they're desperate measures that could easily have failed. Season 3 escalates the threat considerably with the flesh monster. After the gate is closed, a piece of the Mind Flayer is trapped in Hawkins. It survives by going dormant, waiting. When the Russians start trying to reopen the gate with their key device, the Mind Flayer senses the opportunity and begins preparing. It possesses Billy Hargrove, using him as a template and central node. Through Billy, it possesses other people, creating the Flayed. These possessed humans are made to consume chemicals and fertilizers, stuff that breaks down organic tissue. Then they're gathered to a central location, an abandoned warehouse, where the Mind Flayer merges them all together. The flesh monster is absolutely horrifying in concept and execution. It's made from melted human bodies, dozens of people dissolved and combined into one massive creature. It has a vaguely spider-like shape, mimicking the shadow form of the Mind Flayer, but it's organic and dripping and just gross on every level. The creature is huge, strong enough to smash through walls, and nearly impossible to kill because it's composed of so much biomass. Injuring it just makes it reshape itself. The only way to truly defeat it is to sever its connection to the Mind Flayer by closing the gate the Russians are opening. The final battle in Season 3 is properly chaotic. The flesh monster is attacking them all, trying to kill 11 specifically because she's the biggest threat to the Mind Flayer's plans. Billy, still possessed but fighting internally against the control, is the weak point. Max reaches through to him, reminds him of his humanity, and Billy turns against the Mind Flayer. He shields 11 from the monster's attack, getting impaled and killed in the process. Simultaneously, Hopper and Joyce destroy the key device, closing the gate. With the connection severed, the flesh monster loses coherence and collapses into a pile of biological waste. It's a grotesque, tragic victory. Season 4 brings us Vecna, and honestly, he's the most dangerous and personal threat the characters have faced. Unlike the Demogorgons or the Mind Flayer, Vecna targets individuals. He doesn't just hunt and kill, he torments. He curses people who are suffering emotionally, diving into their trauma and guilt, making them relive their worst moments. His victims see him in their minds, this rotting corpse figure that only they can perceive, He stalks them through their own psychological pain, getting closer each time until he's ready to kill. Vecna's kills are brutal. He lifts his victims into the air telekinetically, breaks all their bones, and crushes their eyes into their skulls. Chrissy Cunningham is killed this way in Eddie's trailer, her body twisted and broken in seconds. Fred Benson dies the same way at the side of a road. Patrick McKinney is killed at Lover's Lake, his body rising out of the water as his bones snap. Each death is a spectacle of horror, and each creates a gate. Vecna needs 4 gates to converge and tear open a massive rift. By the time the party understands the pattern, 3 people are already dead, and Max is marked as the 4th victim. Max nearly dies. Vecna pulls her into a vision, and she's trapped there, experiencing a nightmare, while her body goes catatonic in the real world. Her friends play her favourite song, Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush. Through her headphones, the music works. It grounds her in happy memories, creates a pathway back to reality. Max runs through the vision, escaping just in time, but it's a temporary reprieve. Vecna tries again during the final confrontation, and this time he gets her. She's lifted into the air, her bones start breaking, and technically she dies. Her heart stops. But 11, fighting Vecna in another dimension, uses her powers to restart Max's heart and pull her back. Max survives but falls into a coma. We don't know if she'll fully recover or if Vecna's curse did permanent damage to her mind or soul. The strategy to fight Vecna requires 3 simultaneous attacks. In the Upside Down, Nancy, Steve, and Robin go to the Creel house, where Vecna's physical body is nested. They hit him with Molotov cocktails and shotgun blasts, trying to destroy his body. In Hawkins, Max uses herself as bait, letting Vecna curse her to keep him distracted and hold him in one place. And in Nevada, 11 uses her powers to fight Vecna psychically, battling him in a mental space while his body is under attack. The 3-pronged assault almost works. Vecna is badly hurt, his body burned and blasted, but he escapes, dragging himself away, and in the moment before they lose him, he completes his curse on Max. 4 gates open and converge, tearing Hawkins apart. The monsters across the 4 seasons show a clear escalation pattern. Season 1 is about survival against a single predator. Season 2 is about closing the source of the invasion. Season 3 is about preventing a reopening and dealing with a catastrophic fusion of creatures. And Season 4 is about fighting a villain who's intelligent, personal, and nearly omnipotent. Each season, the tactics have to evolve. Physical weapons become less effective. Psychological warfare becomes more important. The power of connection, music, love, memory, these things that seem soft are actually the most effective defenses against creatures that attack through mental and emotional vulnerabilities. I think the variety of monsters keeps the show fresh while also building a consistent mythology. They're all connected to the Upside Down and the hive mind, but each type of creature requires different strategies, and they're all ultimately extensions of Vecna's will, now that we know he's been orchestrating everything. The monsters have gotten more complex and dangerous with each season, forcing the characters to get more creative and more desperate in their solutions. And actually, a lot of those creative solutions come from one specific source, the game that's given them a framework for understanding the impossible. Speaking of creative solutions, we can't talk about Stranger Things without discussing how Dungeons & Dragons isn't just a game the kids play. It's basically been a framework for understanding everything that's happened. Now, you can't talk about Stranger Things without diving into how Dungeons & Dragons isn't just a hobby for the party. It's literally how they make sense of interdimensional horror. And honestly, it's brilliant storytelling. From the very first episode, D&D is established as central to who these kids are. Mike is the DM, running campaigns in his basement for Will, Dustin, and Lucas. They're deep into a quest, fighting a Demogorgon in their game, when Will has to bike home and gets taken by a real monster. That first campaign isn't just backstory or character flavour, it's literally foreshadowing everything that's about to happen. The Demogorgon from their game becomes the names they give to the creature hunting them. It's how they conceptualize something that should be impossible to understand. What's really cool about the D&D framework is how it gives the kids a language for the supernatural. When they're facing a monster, they don't just panic. They think about it like a D&D encounter. What are its abilities? What are its weaknesses? How do you defeat it? Mike's instinct is to treat the real-world crisis like a campaign, and that instinct actually helps them survive. They strategize, they plan, they think about resistances and vulnerabilities. All that game knowledge translates into practical problem solving when facing actual monsters. The naming conventions throughout the series all come from D&D. The Demogorgon is named by the boys after the monster in their game. In actual Dungeons and Dragons lore, a Demogorgon is this two-headed demon prince, a powerful and chaotic evil creature. The Stranger Things version doesn't look exactly like the D&D monster, but the spirit is the same. It's a predator, alien and wrong, something that exists outside normal reality. Dustin names the Mind Flayer for similar reasons. In D&D, Mind Flayers are psychic creatures that enslave other beings and consume their brains. They're also called illithids, and they're known for their hive mind and their ability to control others. The parallels are obvious. This shadow monster that possesses will and controls a network of creatures, it's basically a mind flayer. The name gives them a framework for understanding what they're fighting. And then in Season 4, we get Vecna. In D&D lore, Vecna is a lich, a powerful undead wizard who became one of the most feared beings in the multiverse. He's known for his missing hand and eye, which became powerful artifacts. He's a master of secrets and manipulation, and he's basically a god of undeath and hidden knowledge. When Dustin realizes that their enemy is systematically killing people to open gates, that he's this powerful undead entity with a plan, Vecna is the perfect name. It captures both the horror and the methodical evil of what Henry Creel has become. The game also helps them understand strategy. In D&D, you don't just charge at a powerful enemy. You prepare, you gather information, you exploit weaknesses. The kids apply this thinking to their real battles. They research, they plan, they divide responsibilities based on each person's strengths. Mike is the strategist, like a DM thinking several moves ahead. Dustin is the knowledge guy, always explaining the lore and the rules. Lucas is practical and tactical. Will understands the monsters because he's been connected to them. Each person has a role, just like in a D&D party, and they work together as a team because that's what the game taught them. Mike's Season 1 campaign actually parallels the real events in an eerie way. In their game, the party is searching for the missing dwarf prince while fighting a Demogorgon. In reality, they're searching for Will while fighting a real Demogorgon. The campaign becomes almost prophetic, which raises interesting questions. Was Mike unconsciously drawing on something he sensed? Is it just coincidence? Or is the show suggesting that imagination and creativity can sometimes tap into deeper truths? The Duffer Brothers never answer this directly, but the parallel is too strong to ignore. In later seasons, Will becomes the DM, taking over Mike's role after Mike becomes more focused on his relationship with Eleven. Will's campaigns in Season 3 and 4 show his growth and his processing of trauma. He creates adventures that reflect his experiences, stories about being lost and found, about fighting back against overwhelming evil. When Will pitches a campaign in Season 4 and his friends are too distracted or busy to commit, you can see how much it hurts him. D&D isn't just a game to Will, it's his way of connecting with his friends, his way of making sense of what happened to him. When they don't have time for it anymore, it feels like they're leaving him behind. The Hellfire Club in Season 4 shows how D&D creates community and identity. Eddie Munson runs the club at Hawkins High, and it's a haven for outcasts and nerds. Mike and Dustin join when they get to high school, finding a group that accepts them and shares their passion. Eddie is a brilliant DM, theatrical and intense, creating campaigns that feel epic and meaningful. His campaign in Season 4 involves Vecna as the villain, which is another eerie parallel to real events. The kids fighting Vecna in their game, while a real Vecna is killing people in Hawkins, creates this layered storytelling where fiction and reality keep mirroring each other. The 1980s satanic panic context is important too. D&D was genuinely controversial in that era. Conservative groups claimed it was teaching kids witchcraft or devil worship, which is absolutely mental when you actually look at the game, but that's the moral panic that existed. When Chrissy is killed in Eddie's trailer and people learn Eddie runs the Hellfire Club, the town immediately assumes satanic cult activity. Jason, Carver, the basketball captain, whips people into a frenzy, convincing them that Eddie and his D&D club are responsible for the murders. It's a properly dark commentary on how fear and ignorance can turn a community violent. Eddie becomes a scapegoat because people don't understand what D&D actually is, and they're looking for something to blame. What I find really interesting is how D&D represents imagination as a superpower. The kids who play D&D are the ones who survive the supernatural threats because they can imagine the impossible. They don't reject the upside down as impossible. They accept it and figure out how to deal with it using the creative problem-solving skills they learned from gaming. Meanwhile, the adults and the more conventional characters struggle because they can't adapt their worldview to include monsters and alternate dimensions. The game trains you to think flexibly, to accept strange rules and work within them, and that's exactly what you need to survive Hawkins. I think D&D also serves as a symbol of childhood and innocence, and watching the characters outgrow it in some ways is bittersweet. In Season 1, they're all equally invested in the game. By Season 4, Mike is worried about seeming childish in front of his girlfriend. Lucas is torn between his basketball friends and his nerd friends. Only Will and Dustin are still fully committed, and even they sense that this part of their lives might be ending. The game represents a simpler time, before trauma and growing up complicated everything. When they play, they're just kids having fun, escaping into fantasy. But as the real horror in their lives escalates, the fantasy escape becomes harder to access. The show never mocks D&D or treats it as silly. It presents the game as genuinely meaningful, as something that brings people together and teaches valuable skills. The Duffer Brothers, who definitely played D&D as kids, clearly have affection for it. They use it to structure their narrative, borrowing from D&D's episodic quest format and its emphasis on party dynamics and character classes. Stranger Things, basically, is a D&D campaign, with each season as a new quest arc, and each character filling a specific role in the party. D&D gives the party a shared language and framework for understanding the impossible. But what really holds them together through all this horror is something simpler than dice and character sheets. It's their friendship, their bonds with each other, and the found family they've created. Since we're on the topic of D&D bringing them together, let's talk about the party itself. The bonds that make them more than just a group of kids fighting monsters. So at its heart, Stranger Things isn't really about monsters or government conspiracies. It's about friendship and found family. Let's talk about the bonds that hold the party together and make them capable of surviving all this horror. The original party is Mike, Dustin, Lucas, and Will. They've been best friends since they were little kids, meeting in elementary school and bonding over being nerds and outcasts. They're the kids who get picked on, who don't fit in with the popular crowd, who spend their time playing D&D and riding bikes and talking about comic books. Before the supernatural stuff starts, their biggest concerns are beating high scores at the arcade and finishing their campaigns. They're proper tight-knit, the kind of friends who finish each other's sentences and have a million inside jokes. When Will goes missing in the first episode, the other three refuse to give up on him, even when adults are ready to accept he's dead. That loyalty, That refusal to abandon a friend becomes the foundation of everything they do. Mike, Dustin, and Lucas spend season 1 searching for Will, while also helping 11, and the conflict between those two goals creates tension. Lucas doesn't trust 11 at first, thinks she's dangerous and distracting them from finding Will. Mike defends her, insists they need her help. Dustin tries to mediate between them. It's realistic kid friendship stuff, the kind of fights and disagreements that happen when people are stressed and scared, but fundamentally care about each other. 11's integration into the party is gradual and not always smooth. She's not used to friendship or trust. She's been taught that relationships are transactional, that Papa's love is conditional on her obedience and usefulness. The boys show her something different. They share their food with her, teach her about the normal world, protect her even when it's dangerous. Mike especially forms a bond with her that's both protective and romantic. By the end of season 1, 11 is willing to sacrifice herself to save her friends, which shows how much she's grown to care about them in just a few days. Season 2 brings Max into the group, and it's a bit rocky at first. She's the new girl in town, the one everyone's curious about, and both Lucas and Dustin develop crushes on her. This creates competition and jealousy within the party, with Mike being particularly resistant to including her. He's still grieving 11, who he thinks is dead, and he sees Max as an intrusion. But Max proves herself by helping them fight the demo dogs and by genuinely caring about the group. Lucas and Max develop a relationship that's really sweet, two kids figuring out how to care about each other despite their own baggage. Will's role in the party is interesting because he's often the victim, the one being targeted or possessed or suffering, but that doesn't make him weak. Will is resilient in ways the others aren't. He survives a week in the Upside Down as a 12-year-old. He endures possession by the Mind Flayer and fights against it from the inside. He deals with trauma and PTSD while trying to maintain his friendships and his sense of normalcy. Will represents vulnerability and the cost of surviving horror. He's changed by what happened to him, but he's still fundamentally himself, still the kid who loves D&D and draws amazing art and just wants to hang out with his friends. The older kids, Steve, Nancy, and Jonathan, form their own dynamic that eventually connects with the main party. Steve's character arc is honestly one of the show's best. He starts as this stereotypical popular jock, kind of a jerk, Nancy's boyfriend, who's more interested in parties than substance. But when he helps fight the Demogorgon at the end of season 1, something changes in him. By season 2, he's become the babysitter, the guy who takes care of the kids and protects them, even though he's got no stake in their D&D games or nerd culture. His friendship with Dustin is particularly brilliant. They bond over absolutely nothing in common except mutual respect and affection. Dustin looks up to Steve, sees him as this cool older brother figure, and Steve genuinely cares about Dustin, gives him advice, helps him with girls, risks his life to protect him multiple times. Robin's addition to the group in season 3 is perfect. She starts as Steve's co-worker at Scoops Ahoy, someone who finds him annoying and shallow. But when they get captured and tortured together by Russians, they bond over shared trauma and truth serum-induced honesty. Robin's reveal that she's gay and had a crush on a girl from band class, not on Steve, is handled beautifully. Steve's immediate acceptance, his shift from hoping for romance to just being a supportive friend, shows how much he's grown. Robin becomes his best friend, the person he's most himself around, and she integrates into the larger group naturally. Eddie Munson's brief time in the party shows how quickly someone can become family in this group. He's introduced as this local outcast, the guy who runs Hellfire Club and sells weed and is generally seen as a freak by the town. When he's accused of murder and everyone's hunting him, the party takes him in, protects him, believes in his innocence. Eddie sacrifices himself to save them, and even though he was only with them for a short time, his death hits hard because he was one of them. He proved his loyalty and his courage, which is what membership in this group really requires. Joyce and Hopper's relationship is the adult version of the found family theme. They're both broken people, Joyce from her abusive marriage and the stress of raising two kids alone, Hopper from his daughter's death and his subsequent spiral into alcoholism and depression. They find in each other something like hope, the possibility that life doesn't have to be just surviving trauma. Their relationship is slow burn, full of bickering and unspoken feelings and near misses. When Hopper apparently dies at the end of season 3, Joyce is devastated, and when she learns he's alive in season 4, the reunion is this massive release of emotion and relief. They're properly good for each other, honestly. Murray Bauman as the weird uncle figure is delightful. He's cynical and paranoid, living alone with his conspiracy theories, but he also genuinely cares about Joyce and Hopper. He helps them on their various missions, puts himself in danger for them, and occasionally gives them blunt relationship advice. His dynamic with them, especially in season 4 when they're running around Russia together, is both funny and touching. The found family theme extends to characters like Max and Billy in complicated ways. Billy was abusive to Max, controlled her, scared her, but he was also her stepbrother, and on some level she cared about him, or at least about who he could have been if their family situation had been different. His death saving her and Eleven gives Max this complicated grief. She feels guilty for sometimes wishing he was dead, guilty for being relieved he's gone, guilty that she couldn't save him from himself. Found family doesn't always mean healthy family, and the show doesn't shy away from that complexity. What's cool about the party's dynamics is how they shift and evolve across seasons. In season 1, they're tightly unified with simple, clear relationships. By season 4, after years of trauma and growing up, things are more complicated. Mike and Will's friendship is strained because Mike's focused on 11 and Will feels left behind. Lucas is trying to be popular, which distances him from the others. Dustin has his own adventures with Steve and Robin. Max has isolated herself in her grief, but when crisis hits, they come back together. The bonds are still there underneath all the complications of adolescence. I think the show does a really good job of showing how friendship requires work, especially as you grow up. It's easy to be friends when you're all the same age, with the same interests and no responsibilities. It's harder when people start diverging, developing different priorities, dealing with personal trauma. But the core group keeps finding their way back to each other because the foundation is solid. They've been through too much together to just drift apart completely. The found family theme also applies to Eleven specifically, in beautiful ways. She spent her life being told she's a monster, a weapon, a thing to be used. The party, especially Mike, but really all of them, shows her that she's a person deserving of love and belonging. Hopper becomes her father, not through biology, but through choice and commitment. Joyce becomes a maternal figure. The Byers boys become her brothers. She goes from having no family to having this whole network of people who would die for her and who she'd die for. That transformation is what the show's really about. Underneath all the monsters and conspiracies, these relationships are what make the horror bearable and the victories meaningful. But the party story is part of something bigger. The conspiracy extends far beyond Hawkins, with implications that touch the entire country and possibly the world. Because Hawkins' lab wasn't working in isolation. There were other facilities, other experiments, other numbered children scattered across the country. Let's talk about the wider conspiracy and just how deep this all goes. So here's where things get really interesting. Hawkins' lab wasn't the only facility running these experiments. The program was much bigger, with implications that stretch across the entire country and possibly the world. And honestly, the scope of it is terrifying when you start thinking about it. We know from Carly's episode in season 2 that there were other test subjects beyond the ones at Hawkins' lab. Carly, number 8, escaped the lab years before 11 did. She's been living on the streets, gathering other outcasts and using her powers to hunt down the people who hurt her when she was at the lab. Her abilities are different from 11's. Instead of telekinesis, Carly can create illusions, making people see things that aren't there, experience sensations that aren't real. It's a different application of psychic power, which suggests that Brenner's experiments produced a variety of abilities depending on the individual and how they were trained. Carly's existence proves that the numbered children program was extensive. There were at least 18 test subjects because we meet 8 and 11, and we know one, Henry Creel, existed. But were there more? Were there numbers beyond 18? The show never gives us a complete count, which leaves this unsettling question mark. How many children were taken from their families or born in the program? How many survived the experiments? How many are still out there, hiding or using their powers for their own purposes? What's really wild is thinking about how Brenner would have found or created all these psychic children. Terry Ives was experimented on while pregnant, and that's how 11 got her powers. Were other pregnant women used the same way? Were there other facilities running parallel experiments? The MKUltra program was real, and it was vast, spanning multiple locations and involving hundreds of unwitting test subjects. If Stranger Things is extrapolating from that reality, then Hawkins' lab might be just one node in a much larger network. We know the Department of Energy was the cover for Hawkins' lab, but who was really in charge? The DOE doesn't typically run mind control experiments. That's more CIA or Pentagon territory. There must have been coordination between agencies, compartmentalized information, so most people didn't know the full scope, but someone at the top orchestrating it all. Dr. Owens represents this bureaucratic layer, the guy who's not quite evil, but is enabling evil through his participation in the system. He genuinely seems to care about doing the right thing, but he's also committed to maintaining secrecy and managing the situation, rather than exposing it. The existence of the Nina project proves the program didn't end when Hawkins' lab closed. Brenner managed to secure funding and resources to build an entirely new facility in Nevada. That means someone in government was still backing him, still believed in the value of his work despite all the deaths and disasters. Which raises the question, how much does the government actually know about the Upside Down? Is it just a few people in the intelligence community, or does knowledge extend higher? Did presidents know? Did Congress? Or was this all operating in the shadows, black budget programs that officially don't exist? The Russian program adds another layer. How did the Soviets learn about Hawkins' lab and the Upside Down? They must have had either a spy inside the American program or incredible signals intelligence that picked up on the dimensional disturbances. The fact that they built their own facility and tried to replicate the gate opening process shows they understood at least some of the science involved. And they didn't just try once. They built facilities in both Siberia and under Starcourt Mall, kept experimenting, kept pushing until they succeeded, at least briefly. If both the Americans and Soviets knew about the Upside Down by the mid-1980s, do other countries know? Are there Chinese or British or French programs trying to access it? The potential for international conflict over dimensional resources is massive. Imagine if someone figured out how to reliably open gates and extract creatures or materials from the Upside Down. Imagine if someone weaponized Vecna's curse technique or replicated Eleven's powers in soldiers. The Upside Down could become the next arms race, which is properly terrifying. There's also the question of how much of this is coordinated versus accidental. Did Brenner know he was creating the conditions for Vecna's return? Or was that an unintended consequence? When the government kept funding the program after the initial disaster, were they trying to fix the problem they'd created, or were they doubling down on trying to weaponize it? The different factions within the government, some wanting to protect Eleven and some wanting to neutralize her, suggest there's no unified understanding or strategy. Everyone's working from partial information, pursuing their own agendas, which makes the situation even more dangerous. Fun fact that's properly dark. The real MKUltra program destroyed most of its records in 1973 when the program was exposed. The CIA literally shredded the documents to avoid accountability. Only a few files survived by accident. If Stranger Things' version of the program followed the same pattern, then there are probably destroyed records, erased evidence, people who've been silenced or had their memories suppressed. The conspiracy to keep all this secret would have to be massive and ongoing. Every witness, every victim's family, every scientist who had second thoughts, they'd all need to be managed, paid off, or eliminated. The scope of the cover-up is staggering when you think about it. By season 4, there have been multiple mass casualty events in Hawkins. The lab fire in season 1, which was covered up. The deaths during Will's possession in season 2. The Starcourt fire in season 3, which killed dozens of people. And in season 4, the earthquake that's actually the gates opening kills or displaces hundreds. At some point, the government can't keep explaining away what's happening in this town. The conspiracy would need to extend to local officials, state government, maybe even media organisations to suppress the real story. It's not sustainable long term, which suggests that, eventually, the truth about the Upside Down will have to come out. I think the wider conspiracy works as a storytelling element because it makes the stakes global rather than just local. Hawkins is the epicenter, the place where the barriers are thinnest and the gates keep opening, but the implications affect everyone. If Vecna succeeds in merging the dimensions, it won't just destroy Hawkins, it'll potentially consume the entire world. The fact that governments are aware of this threat but are keeping it secret, preventing international cooperation or public preparedness, makes them complicit in the potential apocalypse. The numbered children, wherever they are, represent a different kind of tragedy. These are people who've been turned into weapons, traumatized, hunted, forced to live in hiding, or used by others. Eleven and Carly got to choose their own paths eventually, but how many others are still controlled by government handlers or criminal organizations? How many died in the experiments? How many went mad from the psychic abilities they couldn't control? The program destroyed lives in pursuit of power, and the full accounting of that destruction has never been done. What's also interesting is how the conspiracy operates on different levels of knowledge. Joyce and Hopper know a lot about the Upside Down firsthand, but they don't know the full scope of the government program. Dr. Owens knows about the program and the gates, but he doesn't know everything Brenner did or the full extent of the international interest. Brenner knew about the numbered children and the original gate, but he didn't understand Vecna or the true nature of the Mind Flayer. Everyone's working from incomplete information, which creates this fog of uncertainty where nobody fully understands what they're dealing with. The show hasn't revealed the full extent of the conspiracy yet, and honestly, it probably won't. Season 5 will likely focus on the immediate threat of Vecna and the gates, not on pulling back the curtain on every government black site and international program, but the hints we've gotten suggest something massive and dark, a global conspiracy that's been running for decades, destroying lives and covering up the evidence. It's properly chilling when you think about how much damage has been done in the name of national security and scientific progress. These are questions the show might answer in Season 5, or might leave deliberately ambiguous, but they add depth to the world, make it feel like there's always more beneath the surface. The conspiracy is vast, and probably not fully revealed yet, but that's part of what makes Stranger Things so compelling. There are always more layers, more secrets, more connections to uncover. And that, my dear friends, is where we'll end tonight's dive into the Upside Down. In a future one, I'm definitely going to cover other topics like individual character deep dives, the music and soundtrack analysis, 80s cultural context and how it shapes the show, the Duffer Brothers' creative inspirations, and how they built this world, and maybe even a breakdown of the behind-the-scenes production and special effects that bring all this to life. There's so much more to explore in this universe. But until next time, stay safe and sweet dreams.